Chapter 677. The Dragon Emperor and his 3 daughters transformed into dragons at the same time. He was still a 50-meter-long dragon, and after Si-Dong transformed into her dragon form, she was actually about the same size as the Dragon Emperor, except that the lines of her body were much gentler, reflecting the beauty of a female dragon. On the other hand, Maotai and Wuliangye were much more exaggerated. After they transformed into dragons, they still looked like sacred evolution fire dragons, just as Ji Dong had said, but the scales on their bodies had become flame-like. Their massive bodies were actually more than 80 meters long, and they were even taller than the Dark Dragon Emperor. In the entire dragon race, perhaps only the Earth Dragon ancestor's body was slightly larger than theirs. The Fire Dragon King and Diamond Dragon King were considered huge in the dragon race, but compared to the father and daughter, they were much smaller. However, the 2 mothers were soon hugged by their daughters' even larger bodies. For a moment, the sky was filled with the whimpers of the dragons due to their emotions. Excited dragon roars sounded in the Radiance Fortress. Immediately afterwards, dragons soared out of the fortress one after another, circling around the Dragon Emperor's family and the Radiance sect's holy disciples. They were also extremely excited, not only because the 3 daughters of the Dragon Emperor had returned alive, but more importantly, the dragon race had at least 2 more saint-level powerhouses. In this aspect, they were already completely superior to the Dark Dragon race. Even if there was only 1 more saint-level powerhouse, the Dark Dragon race would not be a match for them, let alone 2. Apart from when the Light Dragon race ruled the world in ancient times, there had never been so many saint-level powerhouses at the same time. In particular, Si-Dong's magic power was exactly the same as the Dragon Emperor's. That was simply the symbol of the new Dragon Emperor. The standard Dragon Emperor's aura didn't need the Dragon Emperor to confirm anything. She was already the successor of the Dragon Emperor. Back then, after Si-Dong absorbed the essence and blood of the dark green dragon, she had already reached the critical point and immediately fell into the process of breaking out of the cocoon into a butterfly. She had been sleeping by Qin Sichuan's side all along. In fact, at that time, thoughtfulness was very dangerous. Because of its congenital deficiency, it had never been able to break through its own eggshell. Instead, because of the influence of magic, the eggshell became more and more tenacious. After thousands of years, it had no chance to make a breakthrough. Even if it could continue to live, it would continue to maintain this form. However, she had met Qin Sichuan at this time. Qin Sichuan had made Si-Dong her magical beast partner because she could continue riding the sacred evolution fire dragon with Ji Dong. At the same time, Qin Sichuan had seen the hope of Si-Dong hatching. Even the Dragon Emperor and the Diamond Dragon King couple couldn't do anything about it. Naturally, Si-Xian couldn't do better than them in terms of incubation. However, one must not forget that Qin Sichuan now had the soul of the Flaming Bar Empress. There was even a trace of consciousness in her soul. Ever since she had formed a contract with Si-Dong, she had constantly used her consciousness to stimulate the Dragon Emperor bloodline in Si-Dong's body to help it make up for its congenital deficiency. She then stimulated its own bloodline to gradually become stronger. Si-Dong's body had almost become one with the eggshell because it had been imprisoned in the eggshell for thousands of years. It was only with Qin Sichuan's help that it was separated from the eggshell. With so many preparations and the nourishment of the black-green dragon's blood, Si-Dong entered the final state of evolution. After several months of hard work, it finally succeeded in breaking through the shackles and breaking out of the eggshell. The suppression in the eggshell for 3,000 years was not completely bad for it. The massive mana in its body that had been formed by inheriting the Dragon Emperor bloodline had been compressed in such a small area, so one could imagine how rich it was. As soon as it broke out of the eggshell, it immediately had a mutated breakthrough. It actually followed the sacred evolution fire dragon and broke through to the Saint tier. Furthermore, it was a Saint tier diamond dragon exclusive to the Dragon Emperor bloodline, and the most direct successor to the Dragon Emperor's throne. In terms of overall strength, although she was weaker than her two younger sisters, she was much stronger than any one of Maotai and Wuliangye. Looking at the reunion of their family, the eyes of the Saints of the Light Army could not help but blur. Ever since the Second War on the Holy Evil Island, when they had narrowly escaped death in the myriad Thunder Purgatory realm, they had not been so excited and relaxed for a long time. Although the battle between light and darkness had not ended, they had never been as relaxed as they were now. The three Saint-Tier dragons, as well as the Saint-Tier Ji-Dong and Chrysanthemum Pig, 5 Saint-Tier powerhouses faced the army of darkness. With the help of millions of fire crows, the army of light had reached an unprecedented state of strength. They were no longer afraid of a head-on confrontation. The dragon race danced excitedly in the air, and the entire light fortress became a sea of joy. As the commander, Ji Yunxing's eyes were also misty with tears. What could make him more excited than seeing his grandson return safely? Moreover, although he did not know where the millions of fire crows came from, he could see that it must have something to do with Ji-Dong. The situation of the Air Force, which was the biggest difference between the two sides, had been reversed. The return of Ji-Dong also made the Saints of the Light Army more confident than ever that they would win this battle. The dragons continued to fly excitedly in the air. For the Army of Darkness, they were like releasing their power, but who cared? Ji-Dong had already returned to the ground with the Saints of the Light Army and landed on the city wall of Radiance Fortress. As soon as his feet touched the ground, Tianji walked over and the two hugged each other tightly. What could be more exciting than a reunion after a disaster? However, Ji-Dong did not have time to talk to Tianji at this time. After hugging his good brother tightly, he went to Ji Yunxing and the other Supreme Tier powerhouses and knelt on one knee. "Greetings, great-grandfather, master's wife, grandfather, and all the other seniors." Before anyone could answer, Yin Zhaorong had already taken a step to Ji-Dong's side and pulled him up from the ground. Tears glistened in his eyes. "Good child, you've finally returned safely. Do you know how worried Master's wife was about you?" Looking at his relatives in front of him, Ji-Dong could not help but feel a little conflicted. He knew that if he really died, everyone present would be extremely sad. However, he still had to go to the flaming bar in the end. Thinking of this, Ji-Dong could not help but lower his head. He was a little choked up and could not speak. No one, including Chen Sichuan, knew what he was thinking at the moment. They just thought that he was too emotional. Ji Yunxing took a deep breath and looked up slightly to prevent his tears from falling. How he wanted to rush up and hug his grandson. However, as the commander of the Allied forces, he had to restrain his emotions. Even if the Light Army had turned from a disadvantage to an advantage, he still could not be careless. "Haha, Ji-Dong, you're finally back. It seems that I've made a big bet this time. Ha 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 ha." Zhou Xiaoxiao danced happily without the slightest self-control of a Supreme Tier powerhouse. Because of his excitement, the fat on his body was constantly jiggling. He strode in front of Ji-Dong and patted him hard on the shoulder. It could be said that the foolishly rich Chamber of Commerce had invested the most in sending the Saints to the Five Elements continent to fight the enemy's rear. At the same time, they also had to bear the greatest risk. If the Saints couldn't return alive, they would suffer a great loss. 3 artifacts, a large number of heaven jade, and high-level magical weapons and equipment. No matter how rich the number 1 Chamber of Commerce in the world was, it would definitely be a huge loss. At this moment, seeing that Ji-Dong and Chen Sichuan had also returned, how could Zhou Xiaoxiao not be excited? With his level 97 cultivation, he could naturally see that Ji-Dong was not the same as before. Back then, before Ji-Dong broke through to the 9 crowns, he was already no match for him. Now that Ji-Dong's magical level had clearly surpassed him, how could his strength be lacking? After the war ended, with Ji-Dong's personality, he would definitely keep his promise and become the successor of the silly rich Chamber of Commerce. Taking a step back, even if he did not stay in the silly rich Chamber of Commerce, as long as he acknowledged his status as the honorary president of the silly rich Chamber of Commerce. Given his contributions to the war, the silly rich Chamber of Commerce's position would probably be unshakable for the next few hundred years. Hence, it could be said that the moment Ji Dong returned safely with the Million Fire Raven army and turned the disadvantage of the Light Army into an advantage, the silly rich Chamber of Commerce's investment was already worth it. Of course, if he could obtain more support from Ji Dong, he would definitely not stand on ceremony. Ji Dong also gave the fatty a hug. After all, no matter how much of a miser he was, he had always been a staunch supporter of the Light Army and Ji Dong. It could be said that he had been of great help to Ji Dong and his companions. Without him, Ji Dong would definitely not have been able to gather all 10 famous wines. Without him, the Light Army and holy disciples would not have all the artifacts. Hence, Ji Dong was very grateful to Zhou Xiaoxiao. At this moment, he could finally make eye contact with his grandfather. Looking at the tears in his grandfather's eyes, even without any verbal communication, he could understand his grandfather's current feelings. In fact, deep in Ji Dong's heart, he had never really hated Ji Yunxing. Firstly, he had transmigrated here and was not the original owner of this body. Secondly, when he transmigrated to this world, he was already an adult. He was very clear that everything Ji Yunxing did was for the benefit of the entire family. As the clan leader and the king of equality, he had too many responsibilities to bear. Do not think that the king of equality's lineage was so glorious now. However, how many dangers were lurking behind this glory? If not for the king of equality controlling the powerful Diamond Core and more than half of the army of the Middle-earth Empire, would the royal family of the Middle-earth Empire be able to sit back and watch as power was lost? Under such circumstances, how could the previous kings of equality not tremble in fear and discipline their descendants strictly? Even if only one king of equality was stupid, it would be a disaster for the entire family. Hence, although Ji Yunxing had gone overboard with Ji Dong's father back then, he had done all of this for the sake of the family. At this moment, as he looked at the tears in Ji Yunxing's eyes, Ji Dong only felt sympathy for this old man. After all, Ji Dong and Ji Yeshang's father was Ji Yunxing's only son. Ji Dong did not say anything to Ji Yunxing. He merely walked to his side and stood still. The others naturally gave up the position next to Ji Yunxing to Ji Dong. Those who knew Ji Dong were naturally excited, but most people did not know him. On the surface, Ji Dong looked like a young man in his 20s. The generals did not understand why these supreme experts in front of them were so respectful to him. However, the scene of the Million Fire Crows had completely shocked them. Even if they were to guess, they could guess that these fire crows had something to do with Ji Dong. Moreover, the Heavenly Stem holy disciples had displayed great strength in battle. Now that the Heavenly Stem holy ruler Ji Dong had returned, his strength naturally surpassed that of the holy disciples of light. Standing next to Ji Yunxing, Ji Dong looked out of the fortress. At this moment, the red clouds in the sky had gradually disappeared behind the Radiance Fortress. Although there were millions of fire crows, they were in groups of thousands. Whether it was attacking or retreating, they were orderly. The fire crows were much more disciplined than humans. Back then, it was their unity that had deeply moved Ji Dong. The Dark Army also retreated, like a black tide, quickly leaving the battlefield. Today's battle had ended because of the sudden appearance of the Million Fire Crows and Ji Dong. Ji Yunxing restrained his emotions and said with a smile, "It seems that we don't have to worry about the attack of the Dark Army for the time being. Everyone, let's return to the fortress's conference hall to discuss our future strategy." The great threat of the Dark Air Force had been greatly reduced because of the appearance of the Fire Crows. Ji Yunxing felt that his spirit had never been so relaxed in more than a year. A sense of exhaustion also arose spontaneously. There were many people in the same situation as him. These military leaders were also very tired. the Light Demon Masters did not retreat for the time being. They were still resting at the top of the fortress. Ji Yunxing led the experts of the military, the Demon Masters, and the elders of the Elder Council back to the fortress's conference hall. If it was another commander, they would have set up a banquet to entertain Ji Dong. With Ji Dong's identity as the Heavenly Stem Holy Ruler, he would definitely have a transcendent status in any country. However, he was also Ji Yunxing's grandson. In order to avoid suspicion, Ji Yunxing did not do so. After returning to the conference hall, Ji Yunxing issued several orders in succession. The most important one was to cancel the previous order to strengthen the walls and clear the fields and withdraw the resources. He wanted the continent's resources to be transported to the Radiance Fortress again to ensure that the soldiers in the front could receive effective supplies. The return of Ji Dong had changed the strategy. Chapter 678. With the millions of fire crows brought back by Ji Dong, the overall strength of the Army of Light would no longer be suppressed by the Army of Darkness. The contrast in strength between the two sides had undergone an earth-shattering change. No matter how weak the individual fire crows were, they were still equivalent to a one-crown demon master, and that was millions of them. Moreover, they could also perform a 1,000-fold combination technique. Their simultaneous attack would definitely play a decisive role on the battlefield. After ordering the cancellation of the strategy of fortifying the defenses and clearing the field, Ji Yunxing immediately ordered the generals below the marshal rank to return to rest, leaving only the supreme commanders of the various countries and the elders of the Demon Master Alliance, as well as the saints and Tianji in the meeting hall. Ji Yunxing's emotions finally showed at this moment. He grabbed Ji Dong's shoulder with both hands, his eyes glistening with tears. "Good child, it's been hard on you for more than a year." Ji Dong looked at his grandfather and sighed. "I just hope that fewer people will die." Ji Yunxing took Ji Dong's hand and walked to the main seat, letting Ji Dong sit down beside him. His behavior did not arouse anyone's disgust. Putting aside Ji Dong's identity as the Saint King of Light, the millions of fire crows he brought today could be said to have saved the entire Radiance Fortress. It was natural for him to receive such treatment, and no one would question it. At this moment, Ji Yunxing felt that he had never been so proud and elated in his life. He looked at the people who had already taken their seats and said, "It seems that our established tactics need to be changed. With the return of Ji Dong and the allied army he brought, we now have the strength to fight the other side as an equal. It is no different from a fool's dream for the Army of Darkness to break through our Radiance Fortress. Their supplies have already been cut off, and we only need to continue to defend. In less than half a month, Tianji and his army will collapse on their own, and then they will kill their way into the Five Elements continent and end this war. I'm afraid that Tianji will not be able to get along. The final result is not that he will rule us, but that he will be ruled by us." Everyone nodded when they heard Ji Yunxing's words. All of them had genuine smiles on their faces. They did not even think of asking where Ji Dong's allies had come from. The Fire Ravens had already displayed great power earlier. It was enough to know that they were allies. However, right at this moment Ji Dong shook his head and said, "Grandfather, I'm afraid we can't defend it." Ji Yunxing was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Ji Dong to oppose his opinion. He frowned slightly and said, "Didn't you just say that we should reduce casualties as much as possible?" Stubbornly defending was the best solution. Although we already have the strength to surpass them, the Dark Race Army's supplies have been cut off by you guys. They don't have the strength to fight for a long time at all. Why should we fight them head-on? Ji Dong said, "Grandfather, listen to me. The allies I've brought are actually power borrowed from the core world. I'm sure everyone has heard of the core world." Everyone's expressions changed slightly when they heard the words core world. Although the marshals of the various countries were from the military, they were also demon masters, and almost all of them were powerhouses with 8 crowns in cultivation. There was no need to mention the supreme powerhouses of the Demon Master Alliance. They had naturally heard of the legends of the core world. Among them, a supreme powerhouse of fire like Yin Zhaoyang had even tried to enter the core world to explore. To them, the core world was a place even more mysterious than the Five Elements continent. Apart from a few people who were familiar with Jidong, most people did not expect that the army Jidong had borrowed power from the core world. Ji Yunxing frowned. Borrowing power from the core world, will Jidong be in trouble? Although it could be said that most of the people present had no dealings with the core world, in their opinion, it was a powerful world that was no less dangerous than the Five Elements continent. If they borrowed their power to deal with dark heaven secrets and instead caused other variables, that was not what they wanted. Jidong shook his head. There won't be any trouble. Grandfather, have you forgotten? The flaming bar was once the ruler of the core world. Ji Yunxing felt slightly relieved. Then you also have to be careful. After all, the Empress of the Flaming Bar has already. A trace of sadness flashed across Ji Dong's eyes. Tianji, who was sitting below Ji Dong, had already answered on his behalf. Although the Empress of the Flaming Bar is no longer here, Ji Dong can make most of the decisions in the core world now. This is because Ji Dong has already taken over the position of the Flaming Bar Empress and became the acting leader of the Holy Church of the Flaming Bar in the core world. He has the authority to control all the races in the core world. If it wasn't for the fact that most of the powerful creatures in the core can't come to the surface world, he might have brought more than just the fire ravens. Hearing Tianji's words, everyone's expressions changed again. Zhou Xiaoxiao even slapped her forehead with a helpless expression. Ji Dong, oh Ji Dong, you really are a genius. You can even control the core world. Ji Yunxing was more concerned about what Ji Dong had said. You brought the fire ravens from the core. What does that have to do with the war between us and the Five Elements continent? Ji Dong replied, the core world has its own laws and food chain. It's completely different from us. The core world is filled with dense fire elements. All the creatures in the core have already adapted to life there. This is also why the powerful creatures in the core can't come to the surface world. It's very difficult for them to survive on the surface. Although the fire ravens live in the second layer of the core world, they also face the same situation. Furthermore, they can't eat any food in the human world. They have to rely on the fire essence fruits produced in the core world to replenish themselves. This time, 1,000,000 fire ravens left the core world with me. Each fire raven can only carry 15 days' worth of fire essence fruits without affecting their flying speed. In other words, they only have 15 days from the time they leave the core world to return. Any longer and there will be problems with their bodies and the replenishment of the fire essence fruit. From the entrance to the core world closest to the Holy Evil Island to here, it took 5 days. The round trip will take 10 days. Hence, we must end the battle within 5 days. Otherwise, the fire ravens won't be able to continue helping us. Hence, we can't just defend. We must defeat the dark race army within the time that the fire ravens can help us. Ji Yunxing came to a sudden realization. I see. He pondered for a moment before continuing. Since that's the case, let's end the battle quickly. Can the fire ravens fight tomorrow? Ji Dong nodded. Today's rest should be enough. Ji Yunxing had a strong grasp of the overall situation. Since there was a time limit for the fire ravens to help the Army of Light, it was clearly the wisest choice to end the battle at the beginning of the time limit. This way, the fire ravens could continue to help for a few more days if any changes were to occur. If they were to drag it out until the end, there would be no follow-up, regardless of their condition. Subsequently, Ji Yunxing used approximately an hour to discuss the key points of tomorrow's battle with the various generals and dignitaries. With the help of 1,000,000 fire ravens, the Army of Light had enough power to fight the Dark Race army head-on. When the discussion was about to end, Tianji moved to Ji Dong's side and whispered something into his ear. Ji Dong could not help but reveal a trace of surprise when he heard Tianji's words. He turned to look at Hyoheim Yunxing and asked, "Grandfather, Has Darkness Tianji not made a move since the start of the war? Ji Yunxing was taken aback for a moment before he nodded. I find it very strange as well. Logically speaking, with his martial saint cultivation, it would definitely be extremely beneficial to the Dark Race army if he were to join the battle. He would also be able to greatly restrain us. However, he has only stayed within the Dark Race army from start to finish and has no intention of making a move. As for why, we don't know either. Ji Dong could not help but frown when he heard this. He had crossed paths with Darkness Tianji a few times and more or less had some understanding of his overbearing and unyielding character. Darkness Tianji had been looking forward to this grand battle for a long time. The heavenly flames of the Red Lotus had finally disappeared with great difficulty, and the Dark Race army had been in an absolutely advantageous state. How could Darkness Tianji endure and not make a move? It must be known that Darkness Tianji was a peak martial saint. Once he made a move, it would not be as simple as restraining them. Given his strength, no one in the Army of Light would be able to restrain him at all. If he were to really make a move, the destructive power he would bring would certainly be extremely terrifying. An uneasy feeling flashed across Ji Dong's mind. He had a nagging feeling that he had missed something. Could it be that Darkness Tianji was plotting something that was out of character for him to do something like this? However, his senior brother had been by his side all this time and had not sent back any news. Ji Dong did not voice out the doubts in his heart. No matter how much he speculated, it would be better to force He Tianji to reveal his trump card. Tomorrow's battle would be the best opportunity. It was time for him to have a good fight with He Tianji. In the Light Fortress, the entire Army of Light had already been mobilized. Tomorrow would be the day of the decisive battle between the two sides. Although in the previous two battles, almost all the magicians from both sides were fighting each other, everyone knew that in the middle and late stages of the war, the final outcome would still be determined by the army. This was because the magician's magical power was always limited. Moreover, in a situation where both sides were exhausted, there would not be much that could be used on the other side's army. When the magicians of both sides did not have enough strength, the importance of the army would become apparent. In terms of numbers, the Army of Light was not inferior to the Army of Darkness. Darkness Tianji's greatest advantage was his Dark Demon Army. Although the army was also very powerful, once they lost the air superiority, the advantage of the Army of Light would definitely increase greatly. The advantage of the Army of Light was predictable. Knock knock. There was a soft knock on the door. Ji Dong, who was sitting upright on the bed and cultivating with his eyes closed, slowly opened his eyes. Sichuan, come in. The door is not locked. With the cultivation of his soul, he was naturally able to easily sense the identity of the person outside. The door opened and Chen Sichuan walked in. When Ji Dong saw her, he could not help but be slightly stunned. This was because Chen Sichuan was wearing a long red dress. Ever since Ji Dong knew Chen Sichuan, she had been wearing a long white dress most of the time. Today, she had unexpectedly changed to red. A strange feeling flashed through Ji Dong's heart. The flaming bar loved wearing red the most. Chen Sichuan turned around and closed the door. Then, she walked to Ji Dong's side and sat down on the bed. She looked at Ji Dong with a gentle gaze. What's wrong, Sichuan? Ji Dong felt a little awkward under her gaze. Chen Sichuan said softly, Ji Dong, can I ask you for a favor? Ji Dong smiled bitterly and said, What is it? Say it. If it were anyone else from the Heavenly Stem Saint, he would definitely agree immediately. However, Chen Sichuan was an exception. He did not dare to agree just like that. Chen Sichuan giggled and said, Am I that ugly? Why are you looking at me with such a bitter face? Ji Dong said helplessly, It's because you're too beautiful. I'm afraid I don't have enough self-control. Chen Sichuan snorted softly. You don't have enough self-control? If you don't have enough self-control, we wouldn't be like this now. I don't think I'm any worse than any other woman. However, I still can't move your heart of stone. Ji-dong, I'm here this time to tell you that I won't pester you anymore. Ji-dong did not expect that Chen Sichuan would come to him so late at night to say such words to him. For a moment, he could not help but feel a little sluggish. A strong sense of loss arose spontaneously. Although he had never accepted Chen Sichuan's feelings, Chen Sichuan suddenly said that she wouldn't pester him anymore. This indescribable feeling made him very uncomfortable. Chen Sichuan's beautiful eyes revealed a sad look. Ji-dong, I think this is a kind of release for both of us. I only ask for one sentence from you. That I won't have loved you for so long in vain. What sentence? Ji-dong asked in a daze. Chen Sichuan took a deep breath. There was clearly some nervousness in her beautiful eyes. She looked into Ji-dong's eyes and raised her hands to caress Ji-dong's face. She used her most gentle voice to whisper to him, "Say you love me." Chen Sichuan was already a perfect beauty. At this moment, the charm that blossomed from her body reached its peak. Her delicate face was right in front of him, and her fragrance was like orchids and musk. Ji-dong's mind was gradually immersed in her. His heart kept beating faster and faster. The emotions that he had suppressed for so long were like a volcano erupting in his heart. At this moment, his heart seemed to have completely melted under Chen Sichuan's gaze. He almost blurted out, "Sichuan I." Chapter 679. Si Xian I. Ji-dong had already said those 3 words in his intoxicated state. At that moment, Chen Si-xian's heart was in her throat. Once Ji-dong said those 3 words, then they could really be together. She had been looking forward to this day for far too long. How could she not be excited at that moment? Chen Si-xian's arrival at night seemed simple, but in fact there were many secrets behind it. First, she had said that she would never pester Ji-dong again. Ji-dong's emotions had changed. Chen Si-xian could guess that Ji-dong actually had feelings for her. Under such stimulation, his mental defenses would definitely weaken. Then, she would use sad words to influence him. Even if it was just to trick him into saying those 3 words, it would be enough. That way they could really be together. At that moment, a hint of struggle appeared in Ji-dong's eyes. Just as he was about to say those 3 words, the face of the flaming bar appeared clearly in the depths of his mind. Ji-dong shivered and his confused eyes instantly became clear. I can't. I'm sorry, Si-xian. I can't say those 3 words to you. The only thing I love is the flaming bar. Ji-dong grabbed Chen Si-xian's shoulders and gently pushed her away from him. Then, in a flash, he had already disappeared from the room. Chen Sichuan stood there in a daze. Her original hope had been shattered in an instant. Although this was not the first time, the pain in her heart did not lessen. Tears flowed uncontrollably from her eyes. Jerk! Ji-dong, you jerk! Why are you so stubborn? I. There was only conflict in her heart. Ji-dong had always loved her. However, it was not because of this identity. Could she blame Ji-dong? If Ji-dong had really said those 3 words, would she have been happy? Perhaps she would have been happy at the time. However, after calming down, what would she think? Perhaps even she herself could not explain it clearly. Ji-dong stood on a high roof and took deep breath. After a long time, he finally calmed down a little. He looked at the night sky and sighed deeply. Si-xian, I know I owe you too much. I'm afraid I won't be able to repay you in this lifetime, but I really can't? I can't let the flaming bar down. Flaming bar, how great would it be if you were still here? With you here, I wouldn't have any more troubles. After dinner, Ji Yunxing went to bed early. It had been at least a few years since he had slept so early, but today, he slept especially soundly. The return of his grandson and the reversal of the heavenly pole of victory had finally allowed him to sleep soundly. At this moment it was already late into the night. Ji Yunxing was old after all, and old people did not sleep much. Moreover, there was a decisive battle that concerned the life and death of 2 continents today. Grandpa, it's me. Don't be surprised. Just as Ji Yunxing was gradually waking up from his sleep and regaining consciousness, he heard Ji Dong's gentle voice. Ji Yunxing was shocked. He hurriedly opened his eyes and sat up in bed. He immediately saw Ji Dong sitting on a chair not far from his bed. Even though he was facing his own grandson, he could not help but be shocked. He had habitually closed the doors and windows before he slept. Moreover, his cultivation base was at the level of the 9 crowns, but Ji Dong had entered without anyone noticing. If this was an enemy, even 100 kings of equality would have died. Ji Dong, what level has your strength reached? This was the first question that came out of Ji Yunxing's mouth after he woke up. Ji Dong smiled and said, in terms of demonic power, there is still a slight gap between me and Darkness Tianji. However, I believe that in terms of overall strength, I am not weaker than him. Ji Yunxing could not help but open his mouth wide when he heard this. Although he had some guesses about Ji Dong's strength, because the children of the Dragon Emperor that Ji Dong had brought back had all reached the martial saint stage, he did not expect Ji Dong to say that his cultivation base was not inferior to Darkness Tianji's. Ji Yunxing stood up and put on his coat. He said, "That's great. With your powerful strength as our backing, we will definitely be able to completely defeat the enemy in today's battle." Ji Dong said, "Grandpa, I have something to say to you. After you hear it, you must calm down." Ji Yunxing was stunned. "What do you want to say?" Ji Dong said in a low voice, "I am at least 70% confident that I will be able to help our Radiance Army obtain the final victory. However, I hope that our Radiance Army will not enter the 5 Elements continent after this battle ends." Ji Yunxing looked at Ji Dong in shock. "Ji Dong, do you know what you're saying? The 5 Elements continent is our old enemy. If we are able to defeat the entire Darkness Army, this will be a rare opportunity. You actually want us to give it up?" Ji Dong said, "Of course this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But, Grandpa, have you ever thought about it? If we attack the 5 Elements continent, then what's the difference between that and the Dark Heaven's secrets? How many commoners of the 5 Elements continent would die miserably under the iron hooves of our Radiance Army? This is absolutely not what I wish to see. I've said it before. Everything I've done is to reduce casualties. In this war there will be fewer deaths, especially those innocent commoners. The 5 Elements continent has already been made miserable by Darkness Tianji. It's not an exaggeration to say that the people are in a terrible situation. If we were to kill our way into the 5 Elements continent, then there will definitely be more commoners who will die in the chaos of war. Moreover, other than the land, there is nothing else in the 5 Elements continent for us to plunder. Once we attack the Darkness continent, how will our Radiance countries divide the territory? This will inevitably create contradictions. I'm afraid that in the next few hundred years, it will be difficult for our 2 continents to be peaceful. I don't know how many people will die because of this. Therefore, no matter what, I don't wish for one side to attack the other's world after the battle ends. If Ji Dong was only Ji Yunxing's grandson, Ji Yunxing would already be giving him face by not slapping him when he said this. After all, this concerned the interests of all 5 empires in the 5 Elements continent. Such a grand battle was about to be won with great difficulty, yet he said that he would not allow everyone to divide the spoils of victory. This was simply offending all 5 great empires. It was simply foolish to the extreme. This was what Ji Yunxing was thinking at this moment. However, of course, he couldn't slap Ji Dong. This was because Ji Dong's identity wasn't as simple as just being his grandson. He himself had the strength to contend against the Dark Tianji. Just this alone was enough to strike fear into everyone's hearts. Moreover, he was the Light Tianji Saint King. Although what he said was foolish from the perspective of the upper echelons of politics, it would definitely garner the support of the people. Regardless of whether it was the commoners of the 5 Elements continent or the Dark 5 Elements continent, it was the same. This was because the commoners would benefit the most from what he wanted to do. In any war, the commoners would always be the ones who suffered the most. Therefore, there was no commoner who wished for the war to continue. Moreover, Jidong's influence on the entire Five Elements continent was something that even Ji Yunxing had to be deeply afraid of. He was the holy teacher of the Magic Guild and the holy teacher in the hearts of all the Light Magic Guild. His influence in the Magic Guild alone was already extremely terrifying. Moreover, he had an extremely close relationship with the dragon race. From the situation when Jidong returned today, it could be seen that the three daughters of the Dragon Emperor had a very close relationship with him and the holy disciples of the Radiance continent. There was no doubt that once there was any problem with the Radiance continent itself, the Light Dragon race would definitely choose to support Jidong without hesitation. This was not the end. From the news that had just been obtained from yesterday's meeting, Jidong had also taken control of the core world and brought an army of millions of fire crows from the core world. As for his relationship with the foolishly rich Chamber of Commerce, the #1 Chamber of Commerce in the world, it had become secondary. It could be said that even the monarchs of various countries had to be respectful when they saw Jidong. Jidong alone was enough to affect the entire Five Elements continent. Therefore, at this time, when Jidong said these words to him, Ji Yunxing had to carry out a deeper level of consideration. The first question he had to consider was, if the 5 great empires of the Five Elements continent did not agree to Jidong's request, what would he do? Was what he wanted to do something that the countries of the Five Elements continent could bear? Soon, Ji Yunxing had an answer in his heart, an answer that shocked him. This was because he found that if he simply added up the forces under Jidong's control, the result was that as long as Jidong was willing, he could easily overturn the entire Five Elements continent. The 5 great empires did not have the strength to fight against him at all. Was this still his own grandson? For him to be able to affect the entire continent with his own strength, Ji Yunxing could not help but frown for a while and was speechless for a long time. Jidong was not anxious at all. Since he could wait here for Ji Yunxing to wake up and say these words to Ji Yunxing just now, it was obvious that he had thought it through. The reason why he did not bring it up at yesterday's meeting was that the most important thing for the Radiance Army now was to deal with the last battle against the Dark Army. At this time, the morale must not be shaken. However, he had to let his grandfather know about this first. Even if Ji Yunxing did not support him to do this, he had fulfilled his duty as a son. After a long time, Ji Yunxing took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Jidong, do you know the consequences of doing this? If you do this, I'm afraid that the future generation's evaluation of you will change greatly. Perhaps you will no longer be the hero who saved the world." Jidong smiled. "So what if I'm a hero or a coward? I don't care about the evaluation of the future generations. What I care about is peace of mind. In fact, I am a murderous demon. The people I have killed and indirectly killed are probably in the tens of thousands. I am not a good person to begin with. It doesn't matter how the future generations evaluate me. I just don't want the Radiance continent and the Dark continent to be filled with the smell of blood. Grandfather, don't you want our Radiance continent to return to its original peaceful days in a short period of time?" Ji Yunxing's eyes flickered. In this short period of time, he had already made a decision in his heart. In fact, his decision represented the entire Central Empire. With Ji Yeshang taking over the position of Crown Prince and Jidong becoming the Holy King of the Radiance continent, his position in the Central Empire was unshakable. "I understand what you mean. The Central Empire and I will support your decision. Tell grandfather what you plan to do." After saying this, Ji Yunxing felt a lot more relaxed. Although this choice was difficult for him, when he really made the decision, he suddenly felt that it was a good thing. Just as Jidong had said, slaughter would never bring any pleasure, only endless sin. Ji Dong could not help but be slightly stunned when he heard Ji Yunxing's words. He had actually come to find Ji Yunxing mostly to tell him about his actions, and he did not expect to obtain his grandfather's support. However, at this moment, Ji Yunxing had actually expressed his approval without any hesitation. Moreover, he had even used the Central Plains Empire as his shield. Regardless of whether it was for public or private reasons, it deeply moved Ji Dong. "Grandfather, what I want to do is very simple. Just like the first-generation holy disciples of the Radiance Continent and the Dark Heavenly Stem Saints did, let the Holy Evil Island become an eternal barrier between the two continents. The Dark Heavenly Stem Saints have been subdued by me and are on the Holy Evil Island. It is impossible for them to participate in today's decisive battle. After the decisive battle, I will find them and unite the power of 20 holy disciples on both sides to restore the Holy Evil Island to its original state." Ji Yunxing looked at Ji Dong in surprise. "But, didn't the first generation of holy disciples say that they all have the power of saint level? Among you holy disciples, I'm afraid you are the only one who has reached the saint level." Ji Dong said, "What we need to do is much easier than the first generation of holy disciples. At that time, they directly created the Holy Evil Island from the sea and used their powerful power to gather countless fierce beasts in the sea. Finally, they created the rules on the Holy Evil Island. They created it while we just need to restore it. I've already made detailed preparations. With our current strength, there shouldn't be any problems if we work together." Of course, he would not tell Ji Yunxing that he had a special method to restore the Holy Evil Island. However, this special method was carried out at the cost of his own life. When Ji Dong and Ji Yunxing walked out of the room together, the sky in the distance was already pale white. The sky was about to brighten and the dawn had arrived. Would the final victory be far away? The final battle between the Light Continent and the Darkness Continent would definitely take place on this day. All of the forces from both continents would clash on this day. Chapter 680. Since the Radiance Fortress was built, it could be said that today was the liveliest day. The sky was just beginning to brighten and the sun had yet to appear, but the Radiance army in the fortress was already slowly waking up like a sleeping lion. Under the command of the generals, the troops tidied up their internal affairs and ate breakfast in an orderly manner. During the whole process, the Radiance Fortress was strangely quiet. However, if you looked closely at the eyes of the soldiers, you would find that under this silence, there was a hidden excitement and a strong will to fight that could erupt at any time. It had taken 5 years to prepare for this war, but when the war began, they could only hide in the fortress and struggle at death's door. Now the opportunity had finally come. The generals had told them yesterday that today would be the day of the final battle. After this battle, everyone could go home and reunite with their families. Moreover, this time, the Radiance army would take the initiative to attack. In yesterday's battle, everyone had seen the millions of fire crows in the sky. There was no need to say anything else. As long as the soldiers were told that the millions of fire crows were their allies, it would be more effective than any morale-boosting words. This time, the Radiance army finally had their own advantage. With the advantage, would victory be far away? The bright light brought a touch of gorgeous gold to the Holy Evil Island. The moment it slowly rose, all the wide gates of the Light Fortress were opened. The Light army swarmed out of the fortress and lined up in front of the fortress like a tide. Unlike the Dark army, which was all dressed in black armor and flags, the Radiance army was divided into different colors according to different countries. The army from the Eastwood Empire was dressed in green armor and uniforms, the army from the Southern Fire Empire was red, the West Gold Empire was white, the North Water Empire was black, and the Central Earth Empire was yellow. The 5 colors symbolized the 5 elements, as well as the respective colors of the 5 empires. The morale of the Radiance army was high. At the forefront of the army was naturally the demonic Light army, which had already made great contributions. Although they had lost their air force, their total number was still more than 10,000. They were commanded by the elders and the evil masters, and they lined up in front of the formation of the 5 elements. Following closely behind them were the most elite royal legions, led by the Diamond Legion. The 5 great legions were lined up in a straight line. They were the most elite forces of each nation, and behind them were the armies of each nation. It took almost an hour for the million-strong army to walk out of the fortress. At the same time, tens of thousands of fire crows soared into the sky under Jidong's command. The astounding crimson clouds from yesterday appeared in the sky once again. Just like that, radiance fought the saints and divine beasts soared in the sky. The sacred evolution fire dragon sisters and Xidong transformed into human forms and floated behind Jidong and Qin Xishuan. Without a doubt, they had become the rulers of the sky. Just as the radiant army was lining up in front of the fortress, the dark army was also moving. Millions of dark army soldiers slowly walked out of the barracks and lined up 100 miles away. Back then, Darkness Tianji had absolute confidence in his dark army. Hence, he had never considered building a fortress on the Holy Evil Island. Even the Fortress of Darkness in the 5 Elements mainland was just a simple construction. Its main purpose was to store warehouses and manufacture ordnance factories. Therefore, they had no place to defend at all. When the Radiant Army was lining up outside the fortress, they had no choice at all. The Dark Air Force did not rise into the sky. They, who originally had the greatest advantage, could only stay in the Dark Army's formation now. Although they were strong individually, they were nothing compared to the millions of fire crows of the Radiant Army. The fire crows outnumbered them by more than 100 times. Such a huge gap, coupled with the 1,000-fold superposition combination technique, was no longer something that their individual strength could make up for. When the army was assembled, Ji Yunxing raised his head and looked at Ji Dong in the sky. Ji Dong naturally saw his grandfather's gaze. Hyoheim Yunxing nodded. Ji Yunxing took a deep breath, tapped his feet on the ground and soared into the sky. He also had the cultivation of a 9-crown, so he could naturally fly with his physical body. He activated the mana in his body and accelerated, arriving at Ji Dong's side in a flash. Ji Yunxing was dressed in golden armor, which was particularly conspicuous in the sky. Moreover, who among the 3 armies of the Central Earth Empire did not recognize His Highness the Prince of Equality? In their hearts, the Prince of Equality, Ji Yunxing, was synonymous with the god of war. Long live the Prince of Equality! Long live the Prince of Equality! The soldiers of the Central Earth Empire raised the weapons in their hands and let out a deafening roar. Although the other 4 countries did not shout the same, the soldiers of the Central Earth Empire alone numbered more than 800,000. They were definitely the most important link in the 5-nation coalition army. Ji Yunxing spread his arms and made a pressing gesture in the air. He said in a clear voice, "Soldiers of the 5-nation coalition army, you have worked hard." His voice spread far and wide under the powerful mana of the 9-crown, so that the millions of soldiers below could hear it clearly. Immediately, the earth-shattering roar rang out again. This time, it was the soldiers of the 5-nation coalition army shouting together. Millions of people cheered in unison. Even someone of Ji Dong's cultivation could not help but feel his blood boil. What a magnificent scene! After a long time, the voices stopped and Ji Yunxing continued, "It has been 5 years. We have prepared for this war for 5 years. Today is the day of the final battle between us and the invaders. Now I would like to introduce a person to everyone. It is the young man beside me. I believe many of you have heard of his name. He has participated in the battle of the Saint and Devil twice and experienced the great tribulation of the Saint and Devil. He is the commander of the holy disciples of the Light Empire and the creator of the 5 elements cycle formation. Yesterday, at our most critical moment, it was he who brought the million-strong army of fire crows in the sky and helped us solve the urgent situation. More than a year ago, He led his companions and all the holy disciples of the Light Empire to infiltrate the Dark Five Elements continent to work behind the enemy lines. If not for their efforts, we would have to face twice the number of opponents today. He is Jidong. When the name Jidong came out of Ji Yunxing's mouth, the light demon army below was the first to cheer. Ordinary soldiers might be unfamiliar with this name, but who in the light demon army did not know Jidong? This name was too familiar to them. The creator of the Five Elements cycle formation, the Holy King of the Light Empire, was the greatest legend in the Demon Master world. Although ordinary soldiers were unfamiliar with Jidong, when Jidong introduced Jidong, the simple but extremely shocking content was enough to move them. They might not be able to understand other things, but the million-strong army of fire crows in the sky was the most direct. If not for the timely arrival of the million fire crows, they would have faced a devastating disaster yesterday. The dark demon army was secretly moved. He knew that there was no need for his grandfather to introduce him to the light demon army. He did this to create momentum for himself so that he could separate the two continents. However, the morale of the army was the same. Soldiers were no different from civilians. They were also willing to live in peace. As long as the morale of the army was the same and they had the support of the Central Empire, everything would become much easier. With a clang, Ji Yunxing drew his sword and pointed it in the direction of the Dark Race army. He shouted with the loudest voice he could muster, "I, Ji Yunxing, the Marshal of the Allied Army of the Five Empires, will stand with the Holy King of Radiance, Jidong, and lead all the soldiers to fight the invaders to the death. Let us expel the invaders together and restore peace. Listen to my command and march into the Dark Demon Army. Forward, forward, forward." With three earth-shattering shouts, the Light Demon Army maintained their neat formation and advanced in the direction of the Dark Demon Army. It was already the third day of this grand battle. However, this was the first time the Light Demon Army had launched an attack with such confidence. Furthermore, it was an attack that did not leave any path of retreat for themselves. Jidong gazed at the Dark Demon Army in the distance. He lined up in the sky and the blood-red Holy King armor instantly covered his body. At the same time, a dazzling golden light burst forth. The golden light that was filled with the aura of light caused the sun in the sky to pale in comparison. It made him the most dazzling person on the entire battlefield. "Dark Tianji, do you dare to fight me?" Jidong shouted wildly. His voice was filled with dominance. Ji Yunxing's voice was a far cry from his. Jidong's shout was not only heard by the Light Demon Army, but also by the Dark Demon Army in the distance. The uneasy feeling from the previous day still lingered in Jidong's mind. The decisive battle was about to begin. He immediately issued a challenge to Dark Tianji. As long as he could restrain Dark Tianji, there was nothing to worry about. In Jidong's opinion, it was impossible for Dark Tianji to not come out after receiving such a challenge. Otherwise, the Dark Demon Army's morale would definitely suffer a heavy blow. Although Jidong could not say that he would definitely win with his cultivation, he could at least hold off Dark Tianji. Although his cultivation was slightly inferior, Jidong firmly believed that with his battle prowess and the support of the Maotai and Wuliangye sisters, he would definitely be able to defeat Dark Tianji. On the Light Demon Army's side, almost every powerhouse had the same thoughts as Jidong. It was impossible for Dark Tianji to not come out after receiving such a direct challenge from Jidong. Although they were surprised that Jidong dared to challenge the opponent's strongest powerhouse so directly, they could not help but admire his courage. Furthermore, given Jidong's identity as the Light Demon King, he was indeed qualified to challenge Dark Tianji. However, something unexpected happened. On the Dark Demon Army's side, all the purple-robed high priests and the nearby dark demonic masters looked at Dark Tianji when they heard Jidong's challenge. They were waiting for their invincible Lord Tianji to destroy the other party. However, Dark Tianji's expression was very calm. He just looked coldly at Jidong in the sky and said indifferently, This is a war between two continents. How can it be a place for individual heroism? Ji-dong, you brat, I will take your life later. Let's go. Kill. The eyes of the purple-robed high priests standing beside Dark Tianji were filled with disbelief. Was this still the Dark Tianji that they knew? Even though Dark Tianji's words were beautiful, they could not change the fact that he was afraid to fight. He actually did not accept the other party's challenge? How was that possible? However, they did not have much time to think at this moment. The Dark Demon Army advanced towards the center of the battlefield under Dark Tianji's orders. The two armies were like two torrents of steel that rushed towards each other. Ji-dong could not help but be stunned when he heard that Dark Tianji had actually rejected his challenge. Although he had only interacted with Dark Tianji a few times, he still had a certain understanding of him. Ji-dong was even more confused than the Dark Demon Army that Dark Tianji had actually not accepted his challenge in this battle. Given his identity as a saint ruler of radiant brightness, if Darkness Tianji could kill him, the morale of the entire Darkness Army would be affected decisively. Furthermore, Ji-dong did not believe that Dark Tianji could not tell that he was the one who had brought the million-strong army of fire crows in the sky. Killing Ji-dong would only benefit Dark Tianji and not harm him at all. There had to be something wrong with Dark Tianji's cowardice under such circumstances. The unease in Ji-dong's heart intensified. However, there was no time for Ji-dong to think too much at this moment. The battle between the million-strong army had already begun. Taking a deep breath, Ji-dong suppressed the thoughts in his heart. His soul cultivation at the peak of the Saint Realm was instantly unleashed and combined with the army of fire crows. Of course, even if his soul cultivation was a bit stronger, as long as he hadn't reached the God Realm, he wouldn't be able to command every single fire crow. However, it should not be forgotten that the million fire crows were divided into groups of 1,000. Even if Ji-dong could not command 1,000,000 fire crows, could he not command 1,000 fire crow lords? He only needed to give orders to these fire crow lords, and he would naturally be able to use his orders on all the fire crows, thus achieving his goal of commanding an army of 1,000,000 fire crows. Under Ji-dong's command, the army of 1,000,000 fire crows suddenly sped up in the air. Relying on their advantage in flight, they entered the battlefield first. Their first round of attacks had already been prepared and could be launched at any moment. Chapter 681. In the air, a large amount of fire elemental mana surged. It was a blood-red sky. The massive amount of fire elemental mana produced by the millions of fire ravens caused the air to fluctuate violently, as if it could explode at any time. Ji-dong's eyes flickered. He had been looking forward to this day for a long, long time. With his and his companions' hard work, he finally had the initiative in his hands. No matter what He Tianji's conspiracy was, he had no other choice at this moment. Boom! The first round of attacks finally began. 1,000 fiery red lights descended from the sky and smashed down on the huge dark army. Although not every attack that was filled with fire elemental mana could reach the level of a primary ultimate technique, the attack that was concentrated by the millions of fire ravens' mana had an incomparably terrifying effect the moment it appeared. Of course, the Dark Race army wouldn't just resign themselves to death. Halos of multicolored light rippled in the sky before the fire crows moved. The great five elements boundary spread out and enveloped the Dark Race army as much as possible, blocking the combined attacks of the millions of fire crows in the sky. The violent rumble caused the entire Holy Evil Island to tremble violently. The feeling of a landslide caused the ordinary soldiers on both sides to lose their footing, and their forward momentum was abruptly halted. Even peak saint-leveled powerhouses like Ji-dong and He Tianji did not dare to approach the center of the elemental storm. The dazzling brilliance made it seem as if a sun had appeared on the ground. The millions of fire ravens in the sky had no choice but to fly higher due to the violent mana recoil. Their formation also became slightly scattered. However, the center of the collision was not in the sky after all, so they only suffered a small portion of it. On the ground, the great 5 elements boundary that the dark demon army had set up had already shattered. The defense of the great 5 elements boundary was indeed astonishing. The synchronized attack of tens of thousands of dark demon masters had actually blocked the combined attack of millions of fire ravens. No, it was not just the 40,000 dark demon army. Jidong soon discovered the problem. The great 5 elements boundary actually included the hundreds of thousands of backup demon masters. It was because of their participation that the Dark Race Army had been able to block the first round of attacks from the Fire Raven Army. However, at least thousands of low-level Dark Mages spat out blood and could no longer fight. The violent impact of the mana caused a large number of Dark Mages to be swept away in all directions, especially the lightly armored infantrymen. Because they didn't have heavy weapons to stabilize their bodies, many of them were thrown more than 10 meters into the air before crashing into the crowd. Jidong's eyes gleamed coldly as he thought to himself, this is just the beginning. The Fire Raven clan's second round of attacks had already been prepared. Thousands of red lights descended from the sky once again with the same power as before. The Great Barrier of 5 elements had no choice but to open a second time, and the same violent rumble erupted above the Dark Race Army. Lord Tianji, if this goes on, we'll be finished. We have to deal with it. The chief high priest of the Darkness Divine Temple said anxiously to Dark Fate. His face was filled with intense fear. At this moment, the main battle mages on both sides were only 30 meters apart. The Fire Raven clan could attack 3 more times at most before the Dark Mages would enter the attack range of the Light Mages. At that time, how would the Dark Mages, completely suppressed by the Fire Raven army, be able to withstand the terrifying attacks of the Light Mages' elemental cycle formation? Although it was impossible for the millions of Dark Race army to be completely wiped out, it would be enough to decide the outcome of this battle. Then what do you think we should do? What astonished the chief high priest was that he actually saw a look of shock on Dark Fate's face. This Lord Dark Fate was no longer able to remain calm. However, the chief high priest had no time to wonder why Dark Fate had suddenly panicked. He hurriedly said, "Let us go and hold them off." Dark Fate said urgently, "Then why aren't you all going?" The violet-robed high priests exchanged glances. At this moment, the third wave of attacks from the million-strong army of Blazing Crows had arrived. Under such a precarious situation, the violet-robed high priests couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. The chief high priest said to the Dark Dragon Emperor, "Lord Dark Dragon Emperor, please cover us as we charge into the flock of Blazing Crows. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll be finished." He didn't know the exact name of the Fire Ravens, and only called them Fire Ravens. The Dark Dragon Emperor wasn't a fool either. At a time like this, regardless of what he was thinking, the most important thing was to unite against a common enemy. A drawn-out dragon roar rang out, and the remaining 600 or so dark dragons raised their heads at the same time after that battle. Just as the fourth round of attacks from the Fire Ravens and the Great 5 Elements boundary of the Dark Demon Masters shattered, the 600 or so dark dragons soared into the air at the same time and charged towards the sky at their fastest speed. The dozen or so purple-robed high priests followed closely behind. At this moment, they could no longer hesitate. These purple-robed high priests were all 9-crowned sovereign experts. From the performance of the Fire Crows in the battle yesterday and today, they could tell that these Fire Crows completely relied on their numbers to obtain an overwhelming advantage. Their individual strength was not strong. Otherwise, with such a terrifying number, perhaps a single strike would be enough to annihilate the entire Dark Race army. The Fire Ravens relied on their advantage in numbers and stacked combination technique. As long as they could charge into their hinterland, they would definitely be able to kill them in large numbers. This was their only thought. Originally, according to the purple-robed high priest's understanding of Darkness Tianji would definitely do this himself. With Darkness Tianji's incomparably tyrannical cultivation, How could those fire crows possibly withstand his attacks? As long as he could rush into the flock of fire crows, even 1,000,000 fire crows wouldn't be a threat. However, they never imagined that Dark Tianji would appear to be panicking at this time. Not only did he not look like he wanted to take the initiative to attack, but his cowardly behavior clearly indicated that he was panicking. Could it be that their Lord Tianji had always been a paper tiger? This grand battle had already caused him to lose his composure? However, the high priests couldn't be bothered to think about this right now. They only wanted to survive, and the first thing they had to do was naturally to deal with the fire ravens. The 600 or so dark dragons charging into the sky was rather ferocious. They were like a dark cloud rising into the sky, charging straight towards the army of fire ravens in the sky. Lights of various colors continuously shone from the dark dragons, forming a shield to protect their bodies. The Dark Dragon Emperor and the rank 10 giant dragons of the Dark Dragons were flying at the very top. Their defenses were the strongest, and they wouldn't die even if they took a few fierce attacks from the Fire Raven army head-on. Although the Dark Dragons had lost close to 400 members in yesterday's battle, most of them were young dragons with weak cultivation. However, the entire Dark Dragon clan had participated in this grand battle this time. Those young dragons were related to the rank 10 giant dragons that were charging at the very front. How could the Dark Dragons not be furious when their children had died at the hands of the Fire Raven army yesterday? There was an extremely ferocious aura as they charged. They wanted to avenge their children. One must know that the Dragon clan's reproductive abilities were extremely poor. Most giant dragons would only have one child in their lifetime. The death of a child meant that there was no hope. Even the Light Dragon Emperor, who was not far away, was rather shocked by the Dark Dragon's aggressive manner. The 5th round of attacks from the Fire Crows arrived as scheduled. Of course, their targets this time were naturally the Darkness Dragons that had soared into the sky. Amidst the loud booms, the 400 concentrated attacks mainly landed on 100 giant dragons. A rank 10 giant dragon might be able to block 2 or 3 of these powerful attacks, which were akin to beginner-level killing technique. However, 10 attacks hitting them at the same time was quite a powerful blow. Although they couldn't kill these rank 10 dragons in one blow, it was no problem for them to expend a large amount of magic and injure their bodies. The dark dragons flew extremely quickly. After withstanding the first round of attacks, they were only half the distance away from the fire ravens. After all, the Dark Dragon Emperor had led them into the sky just as the fire ravens were about to finish their 4th round of attack. It was also at this time that the Dark Army had entered the attack range of the Light Demon Masters. The 5 elements cycle formation was activated immediately, and the huge red pillar of light stopped abruptly. The Dark Demon Masters didn't even have the time to catch their breath in order to withstand the attack of the millions of fire ravens. They had no choice but to join forces to release the 5 elements barrier again to block the attacks of the Light Demon Masters. Although they didn't suffer from the attacks from above and below, the continuous attacks didn't give them any chance to recover their mana. Furthermore, the attack range of the Light Demon Masters was far greater than that of the Dark Demon Masters. Before they got close enough, the Dark Demon Army could only defend passively. In the sky, after withstanding 2 rounds of concentrated attacks from the Fire Ravens and paying the price of over 50 lives, the Dark Dragons and the purple-robed High Priest finally approached the battlefield in the sky. However, at this moment, the powerhouses of the Light Army had also appeared in the sky. They had rushed over while the Dark Dragons were charging up. The Light Dragon Emperor led his clansmen, the 10 divine beasts of the Light Demon Masters, the powerhouses of the Elders Association, and the holy disciples of the Light Demon Masters all appeared in the sky. At this time, the important contribution that Ji Dong and the rest had made in the 5 Elements continent was completely reflected. If they hadn't killed the Death Guards and the Divine Beasts of the Darkness, and Ji Dong had defeated the Holy Disciples of the Darkness, they wouldn't have been able to appear on the battlefield at this time. Perhaps in this battle, there would be a complete reversal of the advantage and disadvantage. How could the powerhouses of the Dark Demon Army, who lacked the Death Guards, Holy Disciples, and Divine Beasts of the Darkness, be a match for the powerhouses of the Light Demon Masters? This battle could be said to have gathered the strongest forces of the two continents. Neither side had any reservations. If they didn't kill their opponents, they would be the ones dying. The full-scale collision between the powerhouses of both sides had also begun. Ji Dong used his powerful spiritual power to give the order to the fire ravens in the first instance. The large red clouds in the sky that were originally like a piece of iron plate split apart, revealing a huge circular hole. This space was reserved for the powerhouses of both sides to fight. How terrifying would the collision between the powerhouses be? The fire ravens were very fragile individually, and they covered such a large area. Once they were affected, there would immediately be a large number of casualties. Ji Dong let them split up temporarily in order to effectively protect them. Of course, it was also so that their attacks could directly affect the Dark Demon Army below. Whether it was the powerhouses of both sides engaging in a life-and-death battle, or the Fire Raven Army attacking downwards to form a downward bombardment with the Light Demon Masters, nothing could divert Ji Dong's attention. Ji Dong's attention was always on Darkness Tianji, and he was quietly waiting for the most important battle of the entire war to arrive. However, Darkness Tianji actually didn't join the battle with his purple-robed high priests. This caused Ji Dong to be taken aback. What was Darkness Tianji trying to do? Violent explosions erupted on the ground, accompanied by incomparably violent mana undulations. This time, the Light Demon Army's attack finally displayed a terrifying effect. As the Great Five Elements boundary shattered, countless explosions erupted within the Dark Demon Army. Large swathes of the Dark Demon Army were bombarded until their flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Either the Fire Raven Army or the Light Demon Masters alone wouldn't be able to cause fatal damage to them, but when the two were added together, it wasn't as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. Especially after Ji Dong and Ji Yunxing's discussion, the attacking attribute used in the air and on the ground were all of the third fire attribute. The incomparably large amount of third fire element frantically expelled the other attributes of mana in the air, making their killing power even more tyrannical. This time, at least 3,000 Dark Demon Masters were directly killed, and countless more were injured. It was also at this time that Ji Dong moved, because he couldn't wait any longer. Darkness Tianji still didn't participate in the battle, which made him feel even more uneasy. The best solution was to force Darkness Tianji to take action, and resolve the last uncertain factor in this war. As long as he held Darkness Tianji back, everything else would be much easier to handle. In a situation where the situation was already so advantageous, Ji Dong only needed to wait for the other battles to end, and his comrades to rush over to help him. Then, the outcome of this war would definitely be a complete victory. Ji Dong, who was emitting golden light, was like the sun that had fallen, and went straight for Darkness Tianji. Chapter 682. At this moment, not many people on the battlefield were paying attention to the situation over here. After all, apart from the few martial saints that Ji Dong had informed, most people had not noticed the changes over here. Only a few observant people could sense the difference in the atmosphere. Ji Dong's figure appeared at the position where Chrysanthemum Pig had been captured in the next moment. His expression was extremely ugly. Although he had known the importance of Chrysanthemum Pig from the beginning, he knew that everyone had been confused. Compared to the battle in front of him, Dark Tianji paid more attention to Chrysanthemum Pig. He had used this battle to confuse everyone and had only suddenly made his move now. At Ji Dong's signal, the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon and Sea Dong had returned to the battle. Meanwhile, Ji Dong was still floating in the same place. His peak martial saint's spiritual power was fully unleashed as he searched for Dark Tianji's possible location. However, the battlefield in front of him was too huge. Millions of people on both sides were fighting and their emotions were fluctuating violently. This caused the entire battlefield to be filled with massive spiritual power. Even though Ji Dong had a saint-level soul, he could not rely on his own power to repel the spiritual power of millions of people. Hence, it was completely unrealistic to want to investigate every corner of the battlefield in detail. The golden flowing light was like a shocking rainbow in the sky. Before the two armies collided, Ji Dong had already arrived above Dark Tianji's head. His peak martial saint spiritual power was released without reservation. At this moment, there was only Dark Tianji in Ji Dong's eyes. A tyrannical spiritual pressure was exerted on Dark Tianji. Dark Tianji's mental state had already been raised to the limit. If Ji Dong was like a bright sun in the sky, then this black figure that had quietly appeared behind Chrysanthemum Pig was like the dark moon that Ji Dong had once released. However, this figure was much darker and did not emit any aura at all. Even with Chrysanthemum Pig's saint-level cultivation, he actually could not sense anything. When the fat on its back was grabbed by the black palm, the Chrysanthemum Pig only felt an extremely cold aura instantly spread throughout its body. At the same time, something in its body seemed to suddenly explode. Suddenly, its whole body became stiff and unable to move. Its body had completely solidified. In the next moment, his round body was forcibly pulled into the black crack in the air by the black hand. Boom, 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 boom. The attacks of the Light Dragon Emperor, the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon Sisters, and Si Dong arrived almost at the same time. However, their attacks could not stop the black crack from closing. The air had already calmed down, but their hearts were as gloomy as death. Fury's orders were quickly issued. Although he was currently very far away from Ji Dong, Ji had immediately established a spiritual connection with him after he had slashed Dark Tianji's head. However, all he got from Fury was a blank sheet of paper. It was obvious that Fury didn't know where the real Dark Heaven's secret was. At this moment, the outcome of the battle between the Light Army and the Dark Army was completely apparent. The Dark Army was retreating like the tide. The Dark Demon Army was already utterly defeated and could not organize an effective defense. What could the ordinary soldiers do in the face of the millions of fire crows in the air? Ji Dong frowned. Then, a resolute look appeared in his eyes. Regardless of whether Dark Tianji succeeds or not, we have to settle the battle in front of us first. We already have an overwhelming advantage. If it's just Dark Tianji alone, even if he's invincible, it won't be possible for him to conquer our continent in a short time. Let's clip his wings first. Suddenly, Ji Dong understood something. He quickly raised his head and looked at the sky above the battlefield, searching for the figure he wanted to see the most. When Ji Dong's sword reached the top of Dark Tianji's head, Ji Dong was really shocked this time. This was because Dark Tianji was actually staring blankly in front of him. He actually had no intention of resisting at all. Ji Dong said in a low voice, "Dark Tianji, it must be Dark Tianji. We've all been bewitched by him." When the holy evil island faced the great calamity, because Chrysanthemum Pig wasn't on the Five Saint Mountain, he had only devoured 4 other sacred beasts. He couldn't capture all 5 sacred beasts in one fell swoop, so his idea of directly breaking through to become a god was shattered. However, the Dark Altar was extremely difficult to complete at that time. Chrysanthemum Pig himself also said that Dark Tianji didn't have another god's contract, so we relaxed a little. It seems that things are not as simple as Chrysanthemum Pig said. Dark Tianji didn't appear in the previous 3 days of war. I'm afraid it's because he has a way to devour Chrysanthemum Pig. He has been enduring for a long time, because compared with destroying the Radiance continent, the only thing that can make him attach more importance to his breaking through to become a god. He's a human being. Once he becomes a god, the divine realm will not restrain him. At that time, it will be a real disaster for our 2 continents. After listening to Ji Dong's words, the Dragon Emperor and the others all turned pale. Maotai and Wuliangye were fine. They had been following Ji Dong all the time. No matter what they did, it was Ji Dong's decision. They were completely like subordinates of Ji Dong. Rather than saying that the Dragon Emperor was their father, it was better to say that Ji Dong was their father. However, the faces of Si Dong and the Dragon Emperor became extremely unsightly. No matter who knew that a god might appear and become their opponent, they probably wouldn't feel good in their heart. Retreat, retreat quickly. A dazzling red light had already appeared in Ji Dong's right hand. The red light was like a sword, pointing straight at Dark Tianji. The next moment, the blood-red sword in Ji Dong's hand had already slashed down brazenly. However, at this moment, no one could be happy, because everything had exceeded their expectations. Chrysanthemum Pig was captured, and Dark Tianji was simply killed by Ji Dong. What did it mean? Anyone with a discerning eye could see it at a glance. Si Dong asked. Ji Dong stretched out his hand, and the dark crystal crown fell into his grasp. He was immediately shocked, because the magic power emitted by the dark crystal crown showed that the Dark Tianji he had just killed was only a 7-crown devil master. No wonder he had no intention of resisting just now. It was completely because he couldn't move under the pressure of his peak saint-level soul power. Killing him was as simple as killing an ant. A huge magic wave rushed into the sky. Darkness, destruction, oppression, and all sorts of negative emotions were emitted from the black light. Right in the center of the black light, a black altar with a diameter of 10 meters slowly rose, shining with a dim 10-colored light. It was as if the magic of yin and yang, the 5 elements, and the 10 elements had been corroded. After the final evolution of the Fire Divine Sword, it had completely fused with Ji Dong's body. It could be said that the sword was him, and he was the sword. This was also why Ji Dong had the determination to challenge Dark Tianji. Although the intensity of his magic power was inferior to Dark Tianji, Ji Dong believed that in terms of physical strength, he was probably even stronger than Dark Tianji. The cultivation of their souls were similar, and if they fought with all their strength, it would be really hard to say who would emerge victorious. The Fire Divine Sword slashed across Dark Tianji's body, and Dark Tianji's body was instantly cut into 2. His corpse turned into a red light and disappeared, leaving only a crystal surface. What's going on? Chrysanthemum Pig, be careful. The Light Dragon Emperor asked in shock. He had been with the Chrysanthemum Pig for the past few days, so he naturally knew the Chrysanthemum Pig's strength very well. Although this little fat pig didn't have any direct attack ability, its magic power was strong, and it was even stronger than his. Moreover, although the Chrysanthemum Pig's attack was weak, its defense was extremely strong. It also had a devouring skill, which could even devour a creature as large as the Light Dragon Emperor. However, it had been directly captured without any reaction. This proved that the Black Hand could have captured the Light Dragon Emperor if he wanted to. What kind of strength was that? Ji Dong shouted, and his entire body soared into the sky again. At the same time, his soul power instantly contacted the Dian Sacred Fire Dragon Sisters, Si Dong and the Light Dragon Emperor. At this moment, only they, who had reached the saint level, could possibly protect the Chrysanthemum Pig. Although Ji Dong didn't know if his guess was right, the uneasiness in his heart suddenly exploded when he found this sentence. That's right. The real Dark Tianji definitely hadn't appeared on the battlefield. Otherwise, why hadn't he participated in the battle over the past 3 days? This wasn't his style at all. If there was anything more attractive to him than this grand battle, it would be the words, breaking through to become a god. The battle in the sky had already shown an overwhelming momentum. With the existence of the Light Dragon Emperor and the Holy Disciples, and the number of powerhouses on their side far exceeded that of the other party, even though the Darkness Dragon tribe had a large number of powerhouses, the Light Dragon Emperor had completely sealed the victory before he could attack. The total number of the Darkness Dragon tribe was already less than 300, and the Dark Dragon Emperor had just been severely injured by the Light Dragon Emperor and his 3 daughters. If it wasn't for Ji Dong's spiritual guidance, which made them help the chrysanthemum pig, they would have chased after the Dark Dragon Emperor and killed him a moment ago. The Light Dragon Emperor nodded and said, "If we can't find Dark Tianji, we can't do anything at all, and we can't help the chrysanthemum pig either. Ji Dong is right. Everyone, let's attack and get rid of the other enemies of the Darkness Dragon tribe first." However, no one knew what Ji Dong was thinking. The Darkness Demon Army, which had already suffered heavy losses, suddenly saw Dark Tianji being slashed by a sword, and the last hope in their hearts vanished like a bubble. The Darkness Demon Army was instantly disrupted. When the new round of attacks from the Fire Crow Army and the Light Demon Masters arrived, they actually caused nearly 10,000 casualties. They had been tricked. Ji Dong wasn't stupid enough to think that Dark Tianji's cultivation had weakened. Fake, this Dark Tianji was fake. This was the only correct explanation. Was he luring the enemy in? Ji Dong's vigilance was raised to the limit, but he soon realized that he was thinking too much, not good. However, to Ji Dong's surprise, Dark Tianji didn't release his soul, and stood there as if nothing had happened. "Ji Dong, what should we do now?" As he spoke, the Dragon Emperor had already flown out and chased after the Dark Dragon Emperor. He had to get rid of the Dark Dragon Emperor first. If he could devour the Dark Dragon Emperor's crystal core, then he would only need a year to absorb it, and his cultivation would be able to catch up to the Earth Dragon ancestor. With the fusion of light and darkness, it wasn't impossible for him to become a divine dragon in the future. Of course, this was also a precautionary measure. Once Dark Tianji became a divine god, and no one could contend against him, they would have to be prepared to challenge him in the future. At this moment, the advancing Radiance army suddenly stopped. Then, Ji Dong saw a ball of black light quietly blossoming in front of the Radiance army. The black halo spread at an unparalleled speed, and anyone who entered the black light, regardless of whether they belonged to the Radiance camp or the Darkness camp, would be sent flying immediately. The Radiance army seemed to have crashed into an iron wall, and their high morale was greatly affected. Fortunately, the black light did not cover a large area. It was only about 100 meters in diameter, which was insignificant compared to the battlefield that stretched as far as the eye could see. That was because the mana fluctuations emitted by the 100-meter diameter black light were simply too terrifying. The Darkness Army was Dark Tianji's greatest accomplice. If Dark Tianji became a divine god, then these troops would become the future slaughterers. However, he didn't join the battle directly, because he had to maintain his peak state as much as possible as the strongest member of the Light Camp. A cold glint flickered in Ji Dong's eyes. After discovering that his investigation was fruitless, his soul power immediately connected to the Fire Crow army, and he personally commanded the millions of Fire Crows to launch a destructive attack on the Darkness army. However, just as Ji Dong raised his head and caught sight of the chrysanthemum pig, a crack suddenly appeared in the air behind the chrysanthemum pig, and a pitch-black figure appeared silently behind it. A large hand had already grabbed the chrysanthemum pig's back. That green figure was still there, and it was still behind the Light Dragon race, continuously releasing support skills to strengthen the Light Dragon race. Chapter 683. The moment the 10-meter-wide dark altar appeared, the chaotic battlefield suddenly became much quieter. The light magicians stopped attacking, and the Fire Crow army in the sky also temporarily stopped attacking under Ji Dong's command. Almost all the magicians' gazes were focused on the dark barrier. The 10-meter-wide dark altar rose to a height of about 5 meters before stopping. A black figure stood on the altar, and the chrysanthemum pig floated in front of him. "Ha ha ha ha, I've succeeded, I've finally succeeded. You fools, did you think that without the god's contract, I wouldn't be able to devour the last sacred beast of the holy evil island? You're wrong, because you're so stupid that you've forgotten the difference between the current me and the past me. Back then, I was just Darkness Tianji, But now I'm Darkness Tianji at the peak of the Saint Realm. Come, my little darling, your 4 brothers are welcoming your arrival. From now on, I'm God, the God who rules over the entire world. Yes, the one who appeared on the dark barrier and stood on the black altar was none other than Darkness Tianji. However, he wasn't the fake Darkness Tianji that Ji Dong had killed with a single strike, but the real Darkness Tianji. Darkness Tianji raised his head and looked at Hyoheim through the dark barrier, his eyes filled with disdain. Kid, the speed at which your strength increases has far exceeded my expectations. It's enough to surprise me. Unfortunately, you're still too inexperienced. Although ruling over 2 continents is important, how can it compare to becoming a god? As long as I become a god, won't I be able to do whatever I want in this world? How could I not understand the importance of such a thing? You must be wondering why I've only appeared now. Why didn't I make a move on this wood-type sacred pig long before you arrived on the battlefield? It doesn't matter if I tell you now, I'll let you understand. In order to devour this sacred pig, I indeed need the power of the Dark Altar. The reason why I needed the god's contract was because my cultivation wasn't at the Saint Realm. Only with the god's contract could I control them. But it's different now, I'm at the peak of the Saint Realm. As long as I capture this sacred pig, how can it escape the fate of being devoured? Of course, I had to complete the Dark Altar first. The assistance of the Dark Altar in devouring requires the aura of this sacred pig. Hence, when the Red Lotus heavenly fire disappeared, I had to capture its aura for 3 days. Hence, I never appeared on the battlefield and only had a substitute to deal with you. The real me has always been hidden in your radiant army and used the power of the altar to absorb the aura of this sacred pig. Now, everything is done. No one can stop me from becoming a god, unless you can find another flaming bar queen. Can you still do that? Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Dark Fate was extremely pleased with himself. His plan had succeeded, completely succeeded. Before this, no one had known about his plan, not even the purple-robed high priests or Fury. That was because the only person he had truly trusted was himself. Ji Dong's face had already turned somewhat ashen. He did not make a move, because he knew very well that with Dark Fate's character, he would never tell him this unless he was absolutely confident. However, just because Ji Dong didn't make a move didn't mean that the others didn't either. Just as Darkness Tianji was laughing his head off, a low, muffled sound rang out from a corner of the black light barrier. However, a golden figure shot out of it. It was Ajin. When the black altar appeared, Ajin had already quietly returned to the ground. He had taken advantage of the moment when Dark Fate was at his most excited to suddenly attack. However, it was unknown what kind of energy the black light barrier was condensed from. Ajin relied on his dimensional demon domain and the golden ring of annihilation to attack with all his strength, but it was actually useless. His body was sent flying, and he turned into a stream of light that flew far away. Although he was not really injured, he did not feel comfortable either. Dark Fate stopped laughing and snorted coldly. Don't waste your energy. It's useless. Unless a real god is here, no one can interrupt me. What do you think the 5 sacred pigs on the holy evil island are? They were once the pets of the 5 elemental gods of the god realm. Elemental gods are first-class gods, powerful gods. Even their pets, these sacred pigs, have reached the saint tier. Now, with the power of the Dark Altar, the power of the 4 sacred pigs in my body has already sensed the aura of this wood sacred pig, allowing my Dark Altar to emit the yin-yang 5 elements saint-tier energy. This is already the power of a true god. Even if there are 100 times more of you, you still won't be able to stop me from completing this sacred dark ritual. Don't worry, I won't make you wait. I'll start now. As he spoke, Dark Fate raised his hands, and a series of complicated hand seals appeared. In the illusory light, the multicolored light that carried the aura of darkness all condensed towards the chrysanthemum pig in front of him, revolving around the body of the chrysanthemum pig. What was strange was that the chrysanthemum pig didn't struggle at all. It just quietly floated in front of Dark Fate, its eyes filled with hatred and coldness as it watched Dark Fate complete all of this. Darkness Tianji's speed was extremely fast. For this day, he had already waited for 5 years. He had made the best preparations for everything. He was a smart and self-centered person. In fact, with his control over the 5 elements continent, even if he wasn't good at governance, he wouldn't have turned the 5 elements continent into its current state. However, he gave up all of this. He only had one goal, and that was to become a god. For this, he didn't even expose the relationship between the Dark Stem Saints and the Dark Fate Alliance, nor did he participate in the battle between the millions of troops on both sides of the continent. Otherwise, why couldn't he join the battle when the Light Radiance and the Holy Disciples were wreaking havoc in the 5 elements continent? Since he could get the Dark Death Guards to find the Light Radiance and the Holy Disciples, why couldn't he join in? There was only one reason. He had used all of his energy to secretly build the Darkness Altar again, and he had prepared for all of this for 5 years. His forbearance could be said to have reached its limit. Now that he was finally about to achieve his goal, how could Dark Fate hold back? With a poof, Dark Fate's hands had already grabbed the chrysanthemum pig. Instantly, a layer of fine black patterns appeared on the surface of the chrysanthemum pig's skin. These black patterns looked extremely terrifying, causing the chrysanthemum pig's originally cute appearance to become hideous. The chrysanthemum pig's small eyes were filled with pain. In the next moment, his body had been forcibly lifted up by Dark Fate, turned into a green stream of light, and was swallowed into his stomach. At this moment, everything seemed to freeze. Even the expressions of the Light Demon Masters, who couldn't find the truth, changed drastically. They all understood that what Dark Fate was doing now would definitely bring about a devastating disaster. Many Light Demon Masters spontaneously launched attacks at the black light barrier that Dark Fate had formed. However, everything they did was clearly in vain. Even Ajin's attack was useless, let alone the Light Demon Masters. Dark Fate's body suddenly trembled, and immediately after, the light on the Darkness Altar started to move rhythmically. Huge mana fluctuations surged from his position like a geyser, and Dark Fate's body suddenly swelled up a lot. Then, incomparably tyrannical mana fluctuations erupted from his body. Red, yellow, white, and black lights appeared first, and the last to appear was the green light that he had just swallowed. Among the 5 lights, the milky white halo represented chaos, while the black aura outside represented darkness. The chaos of the 5 attributes of darkness was present, and instantly caused Dark Fate's body to undergo a qualitative change. The light of the chaos of the 5 attributes gradually dimmed from its initial intensity, while the light of darkness became more and more tyrannical. This was the symbol of the fusion of darkness, and also the moment when the attributes were reflected. When a person cultivated to become a god, the other powers that assisted in becoming a god would be converted into the ultimate power after becoming a god, and Dark Fate's ultimate power was undoubtedly darkness. Ji Dong, what do we do? Are we just going to watch him become a god? The Saints of Brightness quickly gathered around Ji Dong, and every one of them revealed an extremely anxious expression. The situation in front of them was not something they had expected. Everyone, get ready for the 5 elements cycle formation. I'll be back soon. What made the Saints of Brightness very surprised was that Ji Dong's expression had actually returned to normal, and he had returned to his usual intelligent look. This discovery made the Saints of Brightness very surprised. Dark Fate was about to become a god. How could Ji Dong still maintain such a calm expression? Could it be that he had the confidence to defeat Dark Fate? Without waiting for his companions to ask, Ji Dong had already flown out and instantly appeared in front of the Evil Masters and the Elders Guild. However, the person he was looking for was not his own Grandmaster, Yin Zhaoyang or his great-grandfather, Ji Chang Xen. Instead, he was looking for Lin Qing, the Tai Highness, who had a deep grudge against him. When Ji Dong's body stopped in front of Lin Qing, the group of great masters couldn't help but look at him in surprise. No one understood what he was going to do. Ji Dong floated in front of Lin Qing and respectfully bowed to her. He then looked at Lin Yilei and said in a low voice, "Senior Lin Qing, no matter how much hatred we had before, the outcome of this battle is related to the future of billions of people in our continent. Therefore, I beg you to help me." Lin Qing looked at Ji Dong and couldn't help but be a little dazed. "Me help you? What can I help you with?" Actually, when Ji Dong had just appeared, Lin Qing and her husband's feelings were very complicated. Seeing that Ji Dong had become so powerful, they were a little scared. Of course, it was nothing right now, but what about after the battle? Would such a powerful Saint King attack them? At that time, when Ji Dong was only an 8-crowned saint, he had defeated both of them. Now that he had broken through to the saint level, they were no match for him at all. However, at this moment, they didn't expect that Ji Dong would come to them at such a critical moment. No matter how they thought about it, they didn't think that they could help Ji Dong more than the other saint-level masters, and they didn't think that they deserved this kind of treatment from Ji Dong. Lin Qing said in a low voice, "What do you want me to help you with?" Ji Dong said, "Senior, I still remember that during the battle with me, you used your special plant type Absolute Love Poppy. With it, you temporarily raised your strength to the saint level. Now we are facing Dark Destiny, who is about to become a god. No one can stop him. I'm afraid that even if a real god comes, unless his cultivation is far beyond his level, he won't be able to stop him. Therefore, I hope that you can use the Absolute Love Poppy on me. Perhaps I still have a chance." Lin Qing suddenly understood, and her heart couldn't help but be in awe. Of course, she was very clear about the side effects of the Absolute Love Poppy. She believed that Ji Dong had also guessed it. In order to deal with Dark Destiny, he actually came to ask her to use the Absolute Love Poppy on him. At this moment, she couldn't help but feel ashamed of her previous guess. How could such a selfless Ji Dong take revenge on them? "Alright, I'll help you." Without any superfluous words, Lin Qing's eyes revealed a resolute look. Being united against a common enemy, there was nothing more important than forcing Dark Destiny to deal with him. At this moment, the grudge she had against Ji Dong had completely disappeared. A strange color appeared around Lin Qing. It was a light white. Seeing this white, Ji Dong's eyes suddenly froze. Relying on his soul power that was stronger than Lin Qing's, the moment this white appeared, he could feel that it wasn't the power of primal chaos. There was another strange power. It was the aura of the Absolute Love Poppy. In the midst of the white flashing, Lin Qing's wound had a new branch. The whole branch was green, about 4 feet long, and there were 9 white flowers on it. It wasn't the Ewood Totem's flower of 6 directions, but it was the Absolute Love Poppy, which had a beautiful appearance and an extremely poisonous nature. The light on the Absolute Love Poppy was like a drug that could make any creature addicted, and then be controlled by Lin Qing. It was an extremely powerful magical beast. "Ji Dong, have you really thought it through?" Lin Qing looked at Ji Dong with a serious face and said in a low voice, "If you bear the help of my Absolute Love Poppy, you might become addicted. Although it can greatly stimulate your body's potential, it will cost your life." Chapter 684. If it's used on me, I can somewhat resist it. However, if it's used on someone else, your life will be greatly overdrawn. Lin Qing looked at Ji Dong and said worriedly. Ji Dong's eyes were as firm as a rock. "There's not much time left, let's start." Yin Zhaoyang, who had always been calm, twitched the corner of his mouth when he heard Ji Dong's words. At the same time, he raised his hands and firmly grasped his sister's shoulder. Ji Zhangxin and Shangguan Yinkong clenched their fists at the same time. They felt as if their hearts were being cut by a knife, but there was nothing they could do. They had some understanding of the effect of Lin Qing's absolute love poppy. Once it was used at the cost of overdrawing one's life to enhance one's strength, it could greatly enhance one's cultivation and completely stimulate one's potential. However, the consequence was that one's lifespan would be greatly reduced. If it was used on Lin Qing herself, she could still rely on a year's time to recover. However, if it was used on others, their lifespan would be reduced to only 5 years. However, at this moment they could not stop Ji Dong. They could not disregard righteousness for their own selfishness towards their loved ones. Yin Zhaoyang's heart was the softest. At this moment, tears had already flowed out of her eyes. She suddenly turned around and cried bitterly on her brother's shoulder. "Brother, how can I explain this to Zhu Rong?" Zhu Rong and Zhu Yan, as important logistical leaders of the Radiance army, were not at the front line of the Radiance fortress. Yin Zhaoyang's voice was somewhat trembling. "We can't stop this child, but we will not stand idly by. If it's death, then let us die together today." A white halo had already spread out from the absolute love poppy. 9 beautiful white flowers quietly floated up and softly fell on Ji Dong's body. The rich fragrance turned into juice, quietly entering Ji Dong's body through his skin. This was the greatest enhancement of the absolute love poppy. Lin Qing, of course, knew what Ji Dong wanted. Since Ji Dong had already decided, she must give Ji Dong the greatest support. Ji Dong's body shuddered violently. It was as if he had taken some kind of tonic. The golden light on his body instantly doubled in strength. The yin-yang crown above his head, which was already very dazzling, changed again. Layers of light patterns fluctuated, and in the blink of an eye, the other colors on the yin-yang crown disappeared, leaving only the silver with a hint of gold. Previously, in the core of Ji Dong's yin-yang crown, silver only occupied a small portion. The silver yin-yang crown was the symbol of a saint. The reason why it only occupied a small portion and was mostly replaced by red was because the Vulcan sword Ji Dong had fused with was too domineering. However, at this moment the silver color had actually recovered and was even emitting a golden light. This could only mean one thing. Ji Dong's cultivation had greatly increased again. Just like how the silver double-layered yin-yang crown represented the sacred tier, the golden triple-layered yin-yang crown represented the god tier. This was something that the demon masters of the 2 continents did not know before today. However, at this moment, above the head of Darkness Tianji, such a golden crown had appeared. The triple-layered golden crown was shining brightly. It was exactly the same as the yin-yang crown on Ji Dong's head. The only difference was that Darkness Tianji's crown was completely golden and emitted a black halo. However, the yin-yang crown on Ji Dong's head was silver with a hint of gold, emitting a golden light. Without a doubt, under the stimulation of the absolute love poppy, although Ji Dong had not broken through to the god tier, his cultivation was already extremely close to the god tier. Just as Ji Dong was enduring the amplification of the absolute love poppy, the black light shield below had already disappeared. Darkness Tianji had already soared into the sky like a black lightning, heading straight for Ji Dong. Under the guidance of the Qi, he had found the only opponent that could pose a slight threat to him. Everyone disperse. This is not a battlefield that you can intervene in. Ji Dong's voice suddenly spread throughout the entire battlefield, reaching the ears of everyone on both sides. In the next moment, his body had already collided fiercely with Darkness Tianji, who had risen up. There was no rumbling sound. There was only an extremely violent air current. Even the 9 crowned powerhouses nearby were instantly sent flying like rag dolls after the violent air current was produced. Just as Ji Dong had said, this was not a battlefield that they could intervene in. Ji Dong's body was sent flying by Darkness Tianji, shooting into the sky like a cannonball. Darkness Tianji's eyes were filled with murderous intent. There was a faint black light pattern shining behind him, and his entire aura had become completely different. Ji Dong had sensed this aura before. It was the aura released by the Azura god Shupnus and the flaming bar back then. Even though Darkness Tianji was not as powerful as them, there was no doubt that the aura he was releasing was the unique undulations of a god. However, Ji Dong was not injured after being sent flying by Darkness Tianji. At this moment, the mana in his body had reached an unprecedented and terrifying level. Moreover, he was the Fire Divine Sword, and the Fire Divine Sword was him. As a peerless godly weapon, the Fire Divine Sword had already surpassed any god weapon in the human world. It had even surpassed the god weapons used by overgods in the god realm. Killing Ji Dong, who had been strengthened by the absolute love poppy, would not be easy even for Darkness Tianji, who was at the god level. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already reached an altitude of 10,000 meters. Fortunately, under Ji Dong's command, the army of fire crows had already dispersed. Otherwise, who knew how many fire crows would have perished from this charge alone? Darkness Tianji's eyes were filled with intense excitement. He looked at Ji Dong like a bloodthirsty wolf that had seen the most delicious food. God, I've finally reached the god level. I'm already a god. Ha 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 ha. He was not in a hurry to attack Ji Dong again. Instead, he threw his head back and laughed. Ji Dong looked at him coldly. God? Are you worthy of being called a god? At most, your strength has reached a certain level. However, you're not a god, but a demon. Darkness Tianji said disdainfully. Whether I'm a god or a demon, these titles mean nothing to me. From now on, I'm the ruler of this world. Kid, don't even think about stopping me. Your current strength is just a temporary boost from drinking poison to quench your thirst. Moreover, even if you use this method to strengthen yourself, you still won't be able to reach the god level. What right do you have to fight against me? I've just experienced the mysteries of the gods, so there's no harm in telling you. The mysteries of the gods are speed and strength. It's simple and direct. My speed and strength are above yours, so I'm stronger than you. This is the rule of the god. Just like this. As he spoke, Darkness Tianji appeared in front of Ji Dong in the next instant. He punched Ji Dong's chest, and Ji Dong's body was sent flying. As he was flying, he raised his hands in front of his chest, but it was clearly too late. Yes, Darkness Tianji's speed was much faster than his. At this moment, the entire sky had turned dark because of Darkness Tianji's appearance. Only a certain area around Ji Dong's body was illuminated by the light attribute light. Ji Dong's face flushed red, but he quickly receded. The absolute love poppy's ability to stimulate one's body's potential was too powerful. Even a saint-level expert would be no exception after enduring it. Ji Dong, who already had a powerful recovery ability, was now like a cockroach that could not be killed. Taking Darkness Tianji's punch head-on only caused his expression to change slightly. A blood-red long sword had already appeared in Ji Dong's hand. In the next moment, his body moved. He would not passively take a beating. The duration of the absolute love poppy's effect on Ji Dong's body was different from that on Lin Qing's body. As a high-level saint-level expert, Ji Dong's vitality was huge. The absolute love poppy's enhancement was at the cost of overdrafting his vitality. Hence, he could persist for a much longer time than Lin Qing. Even so, there was still a time limit. Ji Dong had to defeat Darkness Tianji within this limited time. Don't you understand? Hey, Tianji sneered. As he spoke, his figure flashed, and he'd already appeared by Ji Dong's side before he blasted another punch towards Ji Dong. He wasn't anxious at all. How could he be unable to discern that Ji Dong's current strength, including that abnormal defensive ability, was only temporary? Darkness Tianji, who had already become a god, would not take any risk. It was too easy for him to deal with the light army below. One ultimate killing technique was enough to complete the task. The ultimate killing technique was the symbol of a god. Now that he was a god, there would naturally be no problem for him to use it. However, something unexpected happened. Just as he punched, Ji Dong's body suddenly moved half a meter to the side without warning, just in time to avoid this lightning-like punch that was filled with god-level power. Darkness Tianji could not help but be slightly stunned. Under his calculations and divine sense, no matter what, Ji Dong should not be able to avoid this punch. Unless Yi Futian had already completed his movements before he rushed over and judged the position of his punch before he punched. Only then would it be possible for Yi Futian to avoid this punch. In reality, this was indeed the case. Ji Dong's speed and strength were not as good as Darkness Tianji's, but his actual combat experience, especially in close combat, was far from what Darkness Tianji could compare to. This was a move made after his precise judgment. In a battle at the god level, the slightest hesitation could be fatal. Darkness Tianji's movements slowed, and Ji Dong's fire divine sword had already quietly pierced out from under his armpit, just in time to touch Darkness Tianji's arm. His target had originally been Darkness Tianji's chest, but Darkness Tianji, who was at the god level, had a speed comparable to that of light. Although he was stunned for a moment, by the time he reacted, Ji Dong's sword had still failed to pierce his vitals. However, at this moment, the power of the fire divine sword was displayed. The moment the ruby-like sword's edge pierced Darkness Tianji's arm, a golden light flashed like lightning, and Darkness Tianji's arm bounced back, as if it had been electrocuted. A long wound appeared on his arm, and golden flames flickered, causing Darkness Tianji to involuntarily cry out in pain. He hurriedly wiped his injured arm with his other hand, and only then did the flames extinguish. Although the wound had already healed in the next moment, Ji Dong's attack had still injured him. A layer of cold sweat appeared on Darkness Tianji's back. Only now did he realize that the god level was not invincible. Ji Dong, who stood before him, had a weapon in his hands that could injure a god. "You're courting death." Darkness Tianji's furious voice rang out. He had finally broken through to the god level after so much effort, but his body had been injured after such a short period of time. This made the extremely proud Darkness Tianji very angry. His body flickered a few times, and he had already dodged Ji Dong's follow-up attack. At the same time, he also launched a crazy counterattack against Hyoheim. Looking from the ground to the sky, although there was a distance of 10,000 meters, one could still see many things clearly. This was because the battle between Ji Dong and Darkness Tianji was too obvious. In the pitch-black sky, only a ball of golden starlight flickered continuously. The battle between the light and darkness armies had already stopped. At this moment, millions of people's gazes were focused on the sky. The commanders of the Light Army were no longer in the mood to continue commanding this battle. They could also imagine everything that Darkness Tianji had said to Ji Dong earlier. If Darkness Tianji killed Ji Dong, no one would be able to stop him. In that case, it would be enough to destroy the Light Army in front of him with an area of effect ultimate killing technique. What would be the point of continuing to attack the Darkness Army? Conversely, if Ji Dong could defeat Darkness Tianji, then what would be the outcome of this battle? For a moment, the battlefield on the Holy Evil Island became extremely quiet. Everyone's attention was completely focused on the battle in the sky. Flickering lights flickered continuously in the sky. In just a few minutes, Ji Dong and Darkness Tianji had already exchanged blows thousands of times. Among them, Ji Dong could hit Darkness Tianji less than 10% of the time. Most of the time, he was attacked by Darkness Tianji. At this moment, Ji Dong's 7 apertures were constantly bleeding. The attack of a god-level power was really too terrifying. Darkness Tianji relied on his absolute advantage in speed and strength to attack. It was extremely difficult for Ji Dong to resist. On the other hand, Darkness Tianji possessed a god-level recovery ability. When Ji Dong hit his body, he could use the Fire Divine Sword to injure him. However, in the next moment, the wound would immediately disappear. On the other hand, the god-killing strike on Ji Dong's fire divine sword could not penetrate Darkness Tianji's body and cause any substantial damage to him. The two sides finally stopped temporarily. Ji Dong panted heavily. He could clearly feel his vitality depleting rapidly. However, he had to maintain the effect of absolute love poppy. Otherwise, Darkness Tianji in his god-level state could easily kill him with a single blow. Chapter 685. Brat, don't be so stubborn. You don't stand a chance. Darkness Tianji stared coldly at Ji Dong. In fact, he was extremely shocked. He had never imagined that he would encounter such a powerful opponent after advancing to the god grade. He had originally thought that he would be invincible in this world after becoming a god, and that no one would be able to contend against his power. He could easily control the entire world and destroy all voices of opposition. He was the only one who reigned supreme. However, in the battle with Ji Dong just now, although he had not been injured and had fully experienced the power of a god, he had not been able to seriously injure Ji Dong despite hitting him so many times. This made Darkness Tianji doubt his god-grade strength. In particular, he was extremely fearful of the fire divine sword in Ji Dong's hands. It was a power that could injure him. He was also afraid that Ji Dong's desperate attack would cause him irreparable damage. Hence, he had to hold back 20% of his strength in the battle with Ji Dong, in case Ji Dong suddenly erupted and fought to the death. Darkness Tianji did this not because he was afraid of death, but because there was no need for him to fight to the death with Ji Dong. If their positions were switched, Ji Dong would have made the same choice as him. After all, Darkness Tianji, who had finally devoured the chrysanthemum pig, was no longer on the same level as Ji Dong. Ji Dong had only been able to temporarily contend with him by using the absolute love poppy to quench his thirst with poison. There was no need for him to be impatient. Besides Ji Dong, no one else could possibly stop him. Under such circumstances, how could he take the risk? Ji Dong stared coldly at Darkness Tianji and tightened his grip on the fire divine sword. He knew that if he wanted to seriously injure Darkness Tianji, he had to let his deity annihilation strike work in his body. However, Darkness Tianji was simply too fast. He was so fast that even his soul power could not catch him. He had relied entirely on his awareness and foresight to hit Darkness Tianji's attack. Ji Dong slowly raised the fire divine sword in his hand. His gaze became incomparably sharp. In the void, he suddenly took a step forward and slashed out with the fire divine sword. However, his sword wasn't aimed at Darkness Tianji. Instead, it was aimed at the void. Darkness Tianji's soul power, which had just risen to the spiritual sense realm, was firmly locked onto Ji Dong's body. Naturally, he could sense the changes in Ji Dong immediately. His figure flashed and he was already a kilometer away. However, just as he dodged, He Tianji's expression changed slightly. Ji Dong's slash seemed to have struck the void. However, what Dark Fate saw was the shattered void. Wherever the Vulcan sword passed, a pitch-black crack quietly split open. The space was actually torn apart just like that. The most amazing thing was that the torn void solidified and did not close on its own. Instead, it produced a huge suction force. It was as if the entire world was at the center of the tear. The terrifying suction force caused Darkness Tianji's body to stagnate. He, who could have retreated even further, was forcibly stopped in his tracks. Darkness Tianji, who had reached the peak of the Saint stage 5 years ago, had a better understanding of god-level power than Ji Dong, who had been with the flaming bar. Disintegration, shattering, and merging the void were god-level abilities. This was also the only way for humans to advance to the divine realm after becoming a god. The fact that Ji Dong was able to do this proved that he had not simply raised his cultivation to the god level. Darkness Tianji's heart was filled with shock after coming to this conclusion. How was this possible? This kid had only used some special methods to stimulate his body to temporarily increase his power. There was no way he could have truly broken through to the God level. If it was so easy to break through to the God level, he wouldn't be called a god. However, this slash of his was clearly at the God level. That slash seemed simple, but in reality, it was not much easier than creating an ultimate killing technique. What shocked Darkness Tianji even more was that the color of the Vulcan sword, which had originally looked like a ruby, suddenly changed after it tore through the void. The intense golden light that radiated from Ji Dong's body instantly condensed and completely gathered on the Vulcan sword. The originally red sword was instantly dyed gold. An aura that even Darkness Tianji was afraid of emanated from it. It was the power of light. It was this powerful power of light that maintained the torn void. The massive suction force in the void, which had been expanding in all directions, began to change direction and actually condensed on Darkness Tianji's body. The massive suction force actually caused Darkness Tianji's god-level powers to be pulled towards the location where the void had been torn apart. Darkness Tianji's actual combat experience was actually a far cry from Ji Dong's. 5 years ago, before he had devoured the sacred beasts, he had never personally fought. Now that he had suddenly encountered such a situation, he couldn't help but panic. He threw a punch at the void. The shattering of space was silent. Under Darkness Tianji's full-powered punch, the void in front of him was successfully torn apart, revealing a large black hole. It forcibly cancelled out the spatial crack that Ji Dong had torn open. The two suction forces collided and erupted at the same time. Darkness Tianji and Ji Dong's bodies were instantly sent flying, while the two spatial cracks also disappeared. However, this time, Ji Dong wasn't the only one suffering. Darkness Tianji wasn't in a good state either. The terrifying spatial tearing force made him feel as if his body had been struck head-on by an ultimate sure-kill technique. Darkness Tianji spat out a black mist from his mouth. This was Darkness Tianji's origin power after he had become a god. Compared to Ji Dong, who was vomiting blood, this origin power was much more important to him. The distance between the two of them instantly widened by over 10,000 meters. However, the sense of crisis in Darkness Tianji's heart grew even more intense. Through his divine sense, he discovered that Ji Dong's injuries from the collision were much lighter than his own. Ji Dong's injuries were indeed lighter than Darkness Tianji's. This was the overbearing power of the Absolute Love Poppy. The Absolute Love Poppy could be used on any living being that wasn't a god. Furthermore, its effects depended on the user's cultivation base. Although the consequences of using it were extremely serious, the effects of the Absolute Love Poppy were also extremely overbearing during the process of using it. It had a terrifying effect on Ji Dong's recovery. Moreover, although Ji Dong's overall cultivation base couldn't be compared to Darkness Tianji's, after being enhanced by the Absolute Love Poppy, two aspects of his abilities had been enhanced to the god level. The first was his soul. His soul cultivation base was originally at the peak of the saint level. After being stimulated by the Absolute Love Poppy, it had also been elevated to the divine sense level. However, he had only just entered the divine sense level, so there was still a certain gap between him and Darkness Tianji. However, the enhancement of the divine sense would not degenerate along with the backlash of the Absolute Love Poppy in the future. In other words, as long as Ji Dong didn't die after this battle, his soul cultivation base would have already entered the god level. This was something that Ji Dong hadn't expected. There was another aspect, and that was the enhancement of his body. After Ji Dong fused with the Fire God Sword, his body reached the peak of the saint level. In terms of physique alone, Ji Dong was even closer to the god level than Darkness Tianji had been before he had devoured the chrysanthemum pig. During the process of the Fire God Sword's evolution, it had completely absorbed the divine sense of a peak level 2 god. Although the god of slaughter Shupness hadn't become a level 1 god, which was the over-god level, as the number 1 subordinate of the Azura god, one of the 5 sovereigns of the god realm, his strength was unimaginable. If not for the fact that the battle with the flaming bar had taken place in the core of the core world, and that Shupnus had underestimated his opponent, the outcome would not have been the same. Under these circumstances, the fire god's sword had relied on Ji-dong's body and mana to replenish itself, as well as the chaotic energy from the heaven jade that it had devoured and absorbed. When the fire god's sword had fused with Ji-dong's body, and with the help of the 9 natal red lotus seeds that the flaming bar had left behind, if not for the fact that the god level was too strong, Ji-dong's body would have been strengthened to the god level. After all, although Darkness Tianji had become a god, he was just a low-level god. How could he compare to the god of slaughter Shupnus? At this moment, with the help of the absolute love poppy, Ji-dong's body was the first to break through to the god level, and he was even stronger than Darkness Tianji. This was also why he had withstood so many of Darkness Tianji's attacks without suffering any serious injuries. Ji-dong had thought about this attack carefully. He had taken the initiative, and his body's strength and regenerative abilities surpassed Darkness Tianji's. That was why he had suffered fewer injuries than his opponent. After stabilizing his body in the air, Ji-dong's figure flashed, and he quickly approached Darkness Tianji. At the same time, the golden fire god's sword in his hand slashed out once again. Originally, with Darkness Tianji's speed, even if he could not withstand Ji-dong's attack, he could still run away. However, Ji-dong's method of using void space to lock onto him was too overbearing. It was obvious that he wanted both sides to suffer heavy injuries, or even perish together. Even the god-level Darkness Tianji could not suppress the powerful suction force after the void was torn apart. He could only fight it head-on. Why? Why was this so? In his anger and confusion, Darkness Tianji threw another punch. Although he had tried his best to be more careful this time, when the two of them were sent flying by the violent air currents, Darkness Tianji's injuries were still more serious than Ji-dong's. If not for the absolute love poppy's future backlash, Ji-dong could be said to have temporarily gained the upper hand. After 2 attacks, Ji-dong did not attack a third time. Instead, he slowly raised the fire god's sword in his hand. The golden light released by the fire god's sword did not weaken after attacking Darkness Tianji twice. On the contrary, when Ji-dong raised it high above his head, the brilliant golden light became even more intense. There seemed to be countless golden specks of light gathering in the sky. At this moment, Darkness Tianji, who had gotten a chance to catch his breath, had a flash of inspiration. He shouted, "Sun, brightness?" Ji-dong snorted coldly. "You've only realized it now? It's too late. You no longer have the chance to leave the battlefield. Even if we have to perish together, I'll drag you down with me today." Yes, Darkness Tianji had indeed figured out why Ji-dong could unleash such power. The reason was because of their attribute. After Darkness Tianji completed the fusion of the 5 elements, he displayed a god-tier attribute, which was darkness and all darkness. This was his ultimate attribute. Ji-dong, on the other hand, was different. Although he had not truly become a god, he had already entered the god-tier level in certain aspects. In particular, the fire god's sword had even surpassed the abilities of an overgod's weapon, which allowed him to temporarily possess a god-tier attack. Otherwise, he would not have been able to injure Darkness Tianji. The reason why he could unleash an attack that could shatter the void was also because of his attribute. Darkness Tianji was of the darkness attribute. If Ji-dong truly became a god, his attribute would undoubtedly be fire. However, it would not be fire like the fire god, but the flames of light. What was the most powerful flame of light in the world? Naturally, it was the flames of the sun. At this moment, even though the sky had already been turned into darkness by Darkness Tianji's power of darkness, in reality, it was impossible for him to completely block the light of the sun. After all, it was daytime. Daytime belonged to the light, while night belonged to the darkness. In other words, when the power of light around Ji-dong gathered on the fire god's sword in his hand, His fire god's sword had already become a bridge for him to guide the flames of the sun. It was also because of this that he could use the fire god sword to slash the void and collide with darkness Tianji like this. If it had been night, he would not have been able to accomplish this at all. However, just as Ji Dong had said, although darkness Tianji had already discovered this, it was a little too late. This was because he had no way of stopping Ji Dong, let alone escaping from the battlefield. Darkness Tianji knew that Ji Dong had only just figured out the mysteries of this battle method. However, with him being locked onto by shattering the void, it was impossible for him to escape with his god-level speed. Instead, it would give Ji Dong even more opportunities. If this continued, then Darkness Tianji would have to pray that Ji Dong would not be able to maintain this state for too long. Otherwise, the outcome would be just as Ji Dong had said. The two of them would perish together and collapse at the same time. However, how could Darkness Tianji be willing to see this happen? He was a true god-level expert. A cold glint appeared in Darkness Tianji's eyes. As a true god, he immediately thought of a solution after he had calmed down. He also had his own advantages. Chapter 686. Ji Dong and Darkness Tianji were both gasping for breath. The collision of breaking the void 2 times in succession caused them to bear intense pain, especially Ji Dong. He was not a real god, and while fighting, he had to constantly suppress his own vitality. Fortunately, there was a core of life hanging around his neck, constantly instilling a large amount of vitality into his body. Otherwise, his own vitality would have long since been unable to withstand the absolute love poppy's poison. Boy, do you think you can die with me like this? Don't forget, you are not a real god. You should understand what the power of a god is. Back then, the Flaming Bar Queen used the power of a god to prevent me from unifying 2 continents 5 years ago. Now, let's see how you can compete with my true god-level power. Hearing Darkness Tianji's words, Ji Dong's expression suddenly changed. Of course, he knew what the true power of a god was. This power could also be said to be the symbol of a god, and that was the ultimate killing technique. Not long ago, an ultimate killing technique, Myriad Thunder Calamity Realm, created a great calamity on the Holy Evil Island, which also led to the tragedy between the Flaming Bar and Ji Dong. Similarly, the Flaming Bar Queen used an ultimate killing technique, Red Lotus Heavenly Fire, to completely separate the 2 continents, causing the disaster and war to appear on the Holy Evil Island 5 years later. At this moment, the god-level ability that Darkness Tianji was talking about was the ultimate killing technique. Yes, Darkness Tianji was right. Ji Dong himself could not use the ultimate killing technique. Even if his soul had been raised to the level of divine sense, and his body was even stronger than Darkness Tianji's, his magic power was still not enough to enter the god level. He hadn't become a god yet, so he couldn't use his ultimate godly powers under these circumstances. Seeing the change of expression on Ji Dong's face, Darkness Tianji's eyes revealed a cruel smile. Originally, I wanted to leave my first ultimate killing technique after becoming a god to your army. It seems that this plan will have to change. I'm not in a hurry to destroy the light. I'm not afraid to tell you that with my abilities after becoming a god, I'm only confident that I can use a god-tier ultimate killing technique. However, it is enough to destroy you. After killing you, who can stop me from conquering the entire world? A day earlier or a day later was not a big deal. Shattering the void? I want to see what use you have in front of my ultimate killing technique, shattering the void. This space will be your grave. Ji Dong seemed to be in a panic. His body suddenly accelerated, and he used all his strength to rush toward Dark Tianji with incomparable speed. The Vulcan sword in his hand left a trail of golden flames in the sky, and it looked incomparably magnificent. The void was torn apart once again, but this time, Darkness Tianji did not use the same method of tearing through the void to resist. His expression turned solemn, and he put his palms together in front of his chest. A black vortex quietly appeared between his brows, and it was as if an eternal truth had appeared. Jidong's power of tearing through the void was actually unable to attract Darkness Tianji's body. He was clearly still floating there. However, his body seemed to have become invisible and intangible. A black wheel of light slowly lit up behind Darkness Tianji, and a purplish-black ring of light appeared around the black wheel of light. The ring of light emitted a purplish-black light, and it fluctuated like lightning. Jidong held the Vulcan sword with both hands, and it turned into a dazzling golden light that slashed at Darkness Tianji's head. The power of light on the Vulcan sword seemed to have been pushed to the limit by him. Wherever it passed, fine cracks would appear in the air. Boom! The world shook, and Jidong's Vulcan sword stopped 3 feet above Darkness Tianji's head. A layer of purplish-black flames appeared around Darkness Tianji's body. In the next moment there was an ear-piercing tearing sound, and Jidong's body was also bounced back, and he spat out another mouthful of blood in the air. Just as Darkness Tianji had said, the ultimate killing move wasn't something he could stop. After all, it was the power of a god. Of course, with Darkness Tianji's cultivation base, he definitely couldn't use it as easily as he had when he had used the Red Lotus heavenly flames in the flaming bar. Only by unleashing all of his power could he complete this terrifying attack, and it would destroy Jidong. Jidong couldn't block it at all. One after another, black patterns of light emerged from Darkness Tianji's fingertip. Then, they floated up, and under the protection of the purplish-black lightning, they floated to the black wheel of light on his back and imprinted themselves on it. Every time a black light pattern was branded, the black wheel of light behind Darkness Tianji would shine a little brighter, and its power would also become more terrifying. The aura of darkness in the sky would also become denser. Although Jidong's Vulcan sword could still connect with the light of the sun, as Darkness Tianji's demonic power increased, this connection was continuously weakening. The world seemed to be filled with endless dark power. No one could predict the outcome of this battle. On the Holy Evil Island, everyone looked at the sky with different emotions. In the previous battle, the Dark Army was almost completely defeated, and the Dark Demon Army was completely annihilated when Darkness Tianji appeared. There were less than 100 Dark Dragons left, and the Dark Dragon Emperor was successfully killed by the Radiant Dragon Emperor, who obtained his crystal core. Under the joint attack of the Radiant Army and the Fire Raven tribe, the Dark Army lost more than 1 million soldiers. The battle was originally one-sided. However, with the appearance of Darkness Tianji, the Dark Army seemed to see a glimmer of hope. They seemed to see that the omnipotent Lord Tianji had returned, and the hope in their hearts was raised to the limit. On the Radiant Army's side, the atmosphere became much more oppressive, especially for the higher-ups and the elders of the Evil Master Alliance who knew that Darkness Tianji had become a god. No one was optimistic about the battle between Jidong and Darkness Tianji. However, all they could do now was to pray for Jidong. Just as Jidong had said, this level of battle was no longer something they could intervene in, and it was not something that could be decided by the number of participants. In the end, it would depend on the strength and belief of both sides. The dark clouds in the sky that were fluctuating violently seemed to have stopped. If not for the dazzling golden light, the experts of the Radiant Army would have thought that Jidong had been killed by Darkness Tianji. At this moment, Light Tianji, who was standing beside the Prince of Equality, suddenly revealed a faint smile and said to himself, "It's time for us to make a move." Before Light Tianji could finish his sentence, a huge figure appeared in the originally calm sky. It was the sacred evolution fire dragon that had advanced to the saint level. Its shining black and white scales were dyed with a faint golden light. The sacred evolution fire dragon dived towards the ground, and a powerful magical wave erupted from its body. Just as Light Tianji finished speaking, his body had already been swept up by the light released by the sacred evolution fire dragon, and he landed steadily on its back. The saint-level sacred evolution fire dragon was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived below the light saints who had been floating in the sky. It flew up and directly picked up the light saints on its back. Then, it suddenly sped up and flew towards the dark clouds high up in the sky. What are they doing? Ji Yunxing asked in shock. Yin Zhaoyang, who was under the light of victory, murmured, Holy Disciple, they are the holy disciples of the 10 heavenly stems. They are originally one. Perhaps Ji Dong needs their help. This is also our last chance. Yes, it was Ji Dong who had summoned the sacred evolution fire dragon and the light saints to rise into the sky and meet up with him in the sky. 12 light inscriptions had already appeared on the dark halo behind Dark Tianji, and they were still increasing. At this moment, just like how Ji Dong could not stop him from continuing to use his ultimate killing technique, he could not stop any of Ji Dong's actions either. With the divine barrier of darkness blocking the ultimate killing technique, Ji Dong could not do anything to him at all. Hence, Dark Tianji was naturally not afraid of Ji Dong doing anything. In the blink of an eye, the sacred evolution fire dragon had already brought the light heavenly stem saints to an altitude of 10,000 meters. Even with the sacred evolution fire dragon's saint-level protection, when the light heavenly stem saints reached Ji Dong's side, everyone still felt an extremely strong pressure. Was this the pressure of a god-level expert? Every radiant heavenly stem holy disciple was equally shocked. Ji Dong floated down and landed steadily in front of the light heavenly stem saints. With a whoosh, a pair of golden wings spread out behind him. After taking a deep breath, Ji Dong slowly closed his eyes and tapped the core of life on his chest with the hilt of the fire divine sword. Then, he shouted in a deep voice, 5 elements cycle formation. Without any hesitation, the light heavenly stem saints immediately raised their arms and placed them on their partner's shoulders. The demigod-level mana in Ji Dong's body also instantly connected with his partner's, and the 5 elements cycle formation was activated. At this moment, every light heavenly stem's saint did not hesitate to raise their body's endurance to the maximum. The mana stored in the yin-yang crown was also completely unleashed, so that the mana produced by the cycle formation could be gathered on Ji Dong's body. At the same time, 2 layers of black and white mist rose from the sacred evolution fire dragon's body and entered Ji Dong's body through his feet, continuously increasing Ji Dong's mana. With the help of the 5 elements cycle formation, the golden light on the 3-layered yin-yang crown above Ji Dong's head became more and more intense, while the silver light faded. Evidently, with the help of his partners, Ji Dong's strength was inching closer to the god level. At the same time, a golden-red stream of light rose from Ji Dong's vermilion bird bracelet. A 10-meter-long fire phoenix with a 100-meter-long tail appeared out of thin air. Wasn't it the eclipse phoenix, Hua-er? The current Hua-er was even more beautiful than her mother. The 9 tail feathers on her back were 10 meter long, and they had dazzling phoenix markings on them. They emitted extremely rich fire elemental wave. She lifted her head high, and there was a small golden crown on top of her head. The beautiful feathers were overflowing with color, and they emitted a rich golden-red glow. It was exactly the same as the glow that Ji Dong's body had previously released. Yes, Hua-er had also evolved. The sacred evolution fire dragon had broken through to the saint level, so how could she fall behind? The instant the fire divine sword completed its evolution, it raised the strength of Ji Dong's body to the pinnacle of the saint level. The remaining energy that Ji Dong was unable to absorb had benefited her and the sacred evolution fire dragon, allowing the 2 divine beasts to break through to the saint level at the same time. Hua-er let out a sharp phoenix cry, and the rich mana waves instantly rose to the extreme. The mist-like Tai Chi demonic domain directly floated above Ji Dong's head, and the 9 tail feathers on her back curled up at the same time. However, she did not inject her mana into Hyoheim. The Tai Chi demonic domain that had condensed above Ji Dong's head instantly rose up, and directly imprinted itself on Hua-er's chest. The 9 phoenix tail feathers on her back swung down at the same time, and her body immediately shot up into the sky like a sharp arrow of fire, charging towards the black sky. Yes, Horror wanted to break through the layers of obstructions in the sky for Ji-dong, and truly guide the light of the sun onto Ji-dong's fire divine sword. If she succeeded, it would obviously be more effective than directly increasing Ji-dong's mana. The flames of light that the sun possessed were the true inexhaustible source of power. The magewebs on the halo behind Darkness Tianji's back had already increased to 23, taking up 2/3 of the dark halo's surface area. He had been coldly watching everything that Ji-dong and Radiance had done to the holy disciples, and his eyes were filled with disdain. Ji-dong, do you think that you can stop me by gathering the power of all of you? Darkness Tianji sneered. Don't waste your energy. It's useless. Putting aside the fact that their power can't really push you to the god level, so what if they can? By the time you reach the god level, my ultimate killing technique will have already been completed. Will you have the time to release an equally powerful technique to fight against me? I can tell you that the name of my ultimate killing technique is called Hell's Descending Bullet. I just came up with it. Although this technique of mine is a single-target ultimate killing technique, with the strength of its mana, the area of effect is enough to cover a distance of 10,000 meters. Since you want these radiant heavenly stem holy disciples to die with you, that's just right. To be able to die under my first ultimate killing technique, you should feel proud. Ha 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 ha. Darkness Tianji laughed unscrupulously. His ultimate killing technique had already been completed by more than 2/3. Once the magewebs reached 36, the technique would be completed. How could Ji-dong and the rest resist? From his point of view, all resistance would be over. Chapter 687. The ultimate sure-kill skill, Hell's Descending Bullet, was a single-target ultimate sure-kill skill. When Darkness Tianji locked onto Ji-dong with his consciousness, even if Ji-dong could use the instant teleportation scroll to teleport to the other side of the continent, he would still be destroyed by this skill as long as he was still in this world. Hence, Darkness Tianji wasn't afraid that Ji-dong would flee. Moreover, after using the Absolute Love Poppy to increase his strength, the effects of the poppy would disappear once he left this place. What chance would Ji-dong have then? Ji-dong actually smiled when he saw He Tianji's unbridled smile. Although his smile wasn't as arrogant as He Tianji's heart twitched when he saw Ji-dong's smile. What are you smiling at? Darkness Tianji looked at Ji-dong doubtfully. At this moment, the second 8 magewebs had already appeared on the light wheel behind him. There were still 8 left before the Hell's Descending Bullet would be completed. Ji-dong said indifferently, I'm smiling because it's too early for you to rejoice. Do you think that you're the only one who knows how to scheme? You have your schemes, and I have my overt schemes. The final victor was already decided the moment you devoured the chrysanthemum pig. Darkness Tianji wasn't the only one who was shocked when he heard Ji-dong's words. Even the radiant heavenly stem saints, who were casting the 5 elements cycle array formation, were shocked. Only Darkness Tianji and Chen Sichuan could remain calm, because only they knew what Ji-dong was talking about. The light patterns on the dark wheel behind Darkness Tianji had already reached 30. At this time, even if he wanted to interrupt his own skill, it would already be impossible. He had already used up too much mana for this ultimate sure-kill skill, Hell's Descending Bullet. A flash of green light suddenly appeared on Darkness Tianji's chest without any warning. His body shuddered violently, and the expression on his face, which was in the midst of unleashing his ultimate sure-kill technique, instantly froze. The third light rune that had appeared on his hand actually froze just like that, unable to be completed. Just a moment ago, Dark Fate had been incomparably proud of himself, but now, he had a look of incomparable fear on his face. His entire body seemed to have been frozen in place, and the huge mana fluctuations behind him only continued to stagnate. The third light pattern couldn't be formed no matter how hard he tried. No, that's impossible. Darkness Tianji screamed in panic, but no matter how hard he screamed, he couldn't stop the green on his chest from becoming more intense. The wisp of green was like a raging wave that continuously battered his chest, causing the dark aureole behind dark fate to become unstable. The blackish-purple lightning fluctuated violently. Even the divine barrier of darkness around his body that was responsible for protecting him flickered with lightning. Ji Dong coldly stared at Dark Tianji. Impossible? Nothing is impossible. If I don't let you become a god, do you think that you can really become a god? Do you really think that I would forget something as important as devouring all 5 divine beasts to break through to the god realm? You've been very careful with everything you've done. Indeed, I didn't discover any clues. However, I didn't need to discover anything at all. I only needed to make a simple judgment to know what your ultimate goal was. Especially when I saw that you hadn't participated in the battle since the start of the war, I was even more certain of my judgment. No, that's impossible. I've already devoured the last divine beast through the darkness altar. I've truly become a god. Darkness Tianji couldn't continue speaking. The mana surging in his body made him have no choice but to deal with it with all his might. To him, it was no longer about when to use the Hell's Descent bullet to destroy Ji Dong, but how to stabilize the threat of divine power that was surging in his body. Even though there was only 1/5 of the divine power surging in his body, he was currently in the process of casting his ultimate sure-kill technique. He couldn't afford to be distracted at all. Regardless of whether his body collapsed or the collapse of the ultimate sure-kill technique, it would bring him a devastating disaster. Ji Dong laughed, and he laughed very happily. Impossible? You're too optimistic. There's one thing you definitely don't know. You shouldn't have devoured the chrysanthemum pig at all, let alone him. You mentioned before that the 5 divine beasts are the pets of the 5 level 1 elemental lord. Are the pets of gods really that easy to devour? Without the will of the gods, will they be at your mercy? During the great calamity of the Holy Evil Island, the reason why you were able to devour 4 of the 5 divine beasts was because of the Darkness Altar. However, the Darkness Altar's main function was to activate the God's contract. It was precisely because of the God's contract that you were able to complete the devouring of the 4 divine beasts. However, at that time, you didn't manage to devour the chrysanthemum pig, which meant that you would never be able to devour it. But you thought that you could devour the chrysanthemum pig by relying on your magic power that had already reached the pinnacle of the Saint tier, and you even used the darkness altar to lock onto its aura. All of this was actually within my and the chrysanthemum pig's plan. Before I rushed to the battlefield, apart from mobilizing the Fire Raven army from the core world to the battlefield, I also did something else, which was to plan this overt plot with the chrysanthemum pig. With your cultivation at the pinnacle of the Saint tier, if it was a normal battle, the Dark Army would have definitely caused huge losses to the Army of Light under your leadership. If I had exposed you prematurely, you naturally wouldn't have continued to dream of devouring the chrysanthemum pig. Although I could still use the absolute love poppy to suppress you, I wouldn't be able to keep you, and the absolute love poppy can only be used once. Even if we won the battle, once you escaped, you would be an eternal scourge of the 5 elements continent. You, who were hiding in the dark, were enough to bring about a devastating disaster to us. Therefore, I had to take a risk and let you devour the chrysanthemum pig, allowing you to temporarily become a god. Only in this situation will you not run away, and only then will you give me the chance to truly destroy you. Hearing Ji Dong's words, Darkness Tianji's face had already turned as pale as a sheet of paper. All along, he had thought that his plan was flawless, and that no one knew about it. But how could he have thought that Ji Dong had already calculated everything he wanted to do, and had only suddenly acted at the last moment, not giving him any chance to turn the tables? Ji Dong looked at Darkness Tianji, his voice full of ridicule. You didn't expect it, did you? All of my expressions before, including the chrysanthemum pig's deliberate words at the top of the Light Fortress, and all of my actions after being devoured by you, were all within my plan. You have become a god, but you are only an incomplete god, a god with a time bomb in your body. In fact, I could have done it just now if I wanted to seriously injure you, but that might not have been enough to kill you in one blow. Once I gave you the chance to escape from the battlefield, my plan would have failed. So, I was waiting, and at the same time I was also guiding you. Finally, you still couldn't hold back, and displayed your ultimate killing technique. Only at this time, you can't get out of this state. Yes, if your ultimate killing technique can really be completed, we will all be destroyed. However, the first ultimate killing technique in your life will never be able to be displayed. The chrysanthemum pig that you devoured didn't die at all, but was lurking in your body. How does it feel to have your ultimate killing technique interrupted at this most critical moment? Moreover, it is only in this situation that I have enough time to display my skills together with my companions to destroy you together. Back then, it was the great calamity of the Holy Evil Island that you planned that caused Flaming Bar to reveal his god-level strength in order to save me, and was killed by the god of killing sharpness. You are the greatest enemy in my life. Today, I will destroy your body and soul for the sake of all those who have died in your hands and for the sake of the civilians who have suffered on the Five Elements continent, so that you will never be able to reincarnate. Darkness Tianji's plot had succeeded, and he had devoured the chrysanthemum pig. However, Ji Dong's overt plot had also succeeded. In the end, the overt plot overshadowed the covert plot, and the price that Ji Dong had paid was also huge. Using the absolute love poppy had given him the strength to temporarily resist Darkness Tianji. However, he did not care about this at all. So what if he had to give up all his vitality? As long as he could avenge Flaming Bar and his companions who had died in the great calamity of the Holy Evil Island, it would all be worth it. As long as Darkness Tianji was dead, the greatest responsibility on Ji Dong's shoulders would have been completed. At that time, he would be able to find his Flaming Bar. In fact, Ji Dong's overt plot was not without flaws. This was the risk that he had mentioned. If Darkness Tianji had not immediately attacked with his god-level strength after devouring the chrysanthemum pig, but had quickly fled far away to find a quiet place to cultivate and completely control his god-level strength, he would have been able to truly refine the chrysanthemum pig in his body in 10 years at most, and fuse it with his own god-level strength. At that time, he would have truly become a god, and Ji Dong's overt plot would have naturally failed. However, the possibility that Darkness Tianji could see through this flaw was infinitely close to zero. When a person had worked hard for a goal for his entire life, and finally achieved it, how could he remain calm? How could Darkness Tianji, who had become a god, not take action immediately, but instead find a place to cultivate in seclusion? Even if he could really discover it and escape immediately, the worst outcome would be that Ji Dong would have a final battle with him 10 years later. Who could be sure that Ji Dong would not be able to cultivate to become a god after 10 years? Therefore, although there was a flaw in Ji Dong's overt plot, it was almost non-existent. Darkness Tianji had finally fallen for it. Just as Ji Dong had said, the final outcome had been decided the moment he devoured the chrysanthemum pig. The chrysanthemum pig had been lurking in his body, and it had exploded at the last moment of his ultimate technique, instantly bringing Darkness Tianji into the abyss of destruction. At this moment, a brilliant golden pillar of light descended from the sky, piercing through the layers of darkness and landing on Ji Dong's body. It was sunlight that was filled with the aura of light. The Eclipse Phoenix Horror had successfully pierced through the black sky curtain that Darkness Tianji had set up, and completely guided the sunlight onto Ji Dong's body. Ji Dong held the fire god's sword with both hands, and the brilliant golden blade was filled with unparalleled brilliance. Streaks of golden light patterns started to appear on his back, and the demonic power released by the holy disciples and the sacred evolution fire dragon gathered towards Ji Dong's body like rivers flowing into the sea. At this moment, the last trace of silver on the yin-yang crown above Ji Dong's head quietly faded. With the help of all the attributes of the holy disciples and the fire god sword, Ji Dong had finally raised his cultivation to the god tier. With a soft ding, the core of life in Ji Dong's chest quietly shattered. In order to maintain Ji Dong's current state, all the life force in the core of life had been injected into Ji Dong's body. The black sky curtain quickly disappeared like snow melting, and the golden dot in the sky rapidly expanded. The black sky curtain was continuously dispelled by the light. Darkness Tianji's expression had already become distorted. The churning divine power in his body made him unable to do anything. Even though his ultimate killing technique was almost complete, he couldn't use this power at all. He could only watch helplessly as the fire god's sword in Ji Dong's hand blossomed with an incomparably resplendent brilliance. With an explosive hum, the golden light on Ji Dong's body faded, and all the light gathered on the fire god's sword in his hand. The fire god's sword and Ji Dong's body had originally fused together, but in order to maximize the attack, Ji Dong had already separated the fire god's sword from his body. Only by releasing the fire god's sword could he turn this attack into the symbol of the god tier, the ultimate killing technique. Just like Darkness Tianji, he only had the power for this one attack. Even though Darkness Tianji could no longer control the Hell's Descent bomb, the darkness divine power in his body was still incomparably tyrannical. Only by using more magic than his 30 dark light patterns could he completely obliterate Darkness Tianji without affecting everything on the ground below. Therefore, Ji Dong couldn't take the risk. He had to use all of his power to deal with Darkness Tianji. "Go, Fire God Sword!" Ji Dong shouted. The Fire God Sword, glowing with resplendent golden light, pierced through the air. The 4-foot-long fire god's sword glowed even brighter than the sun. The air split apart, and a golden figure silently appeared. The illusory golden figure silently gripped the hilt of the fire god's sword, and in that instant, an incomparable majesty filled the air. This was Ji Dong's ultimate killing technique, the fire god's descent slash. That golden figure was none other than the fire elemental overgod of the god realm. He had been temporarily summoned here by Ji Dong's ultimate sure kill technique, and the might of this sword strike would cause even the god of slaughter, Shupness, to pale in comparison. Trust me, I'll give everyone a perfect ending tomorrow. Don't forget to watch it. At the same time, I'll start uploading the new Heavenly Jewel transformations. Those who haven't collected it, hurry up. Chapter 688. The golden figure descended from the sky with the fire god's sword in his hand. This was the first ultimate killing move that Ji Dong had ever released in his life. Just a moment ago, he might have been able to withstand Darkness Tianji's first ultimate killing move. But in the next moment, everything had been reversed. The majestic golden figure descended from the sky with the fire god's sword in his hand. Darkness Tianji's face was filled with despair as he faced the golden fire god's sword. He couldn't do anything at all. He could clearly feel how powerful the divine power contained in the golden fire god's sword was. The fire god's sword held in the hands of the fire god. With a loud clang, the darkness divine barrier shattered. The next moment, the golden flowing light and the fire god's sword perished 10,000 meters above the sky. Darkness Tianji's body was completely destroyed without leaving a trace. A dark green figure soared into the sky. It was Chrysanthemum Pig, who had been swallowed by Darkness Tianji. The power of darkness and light collided in the sky. These two extremes countered each other. The outcome could only be determined by the strength of both sides. The fire god's sword's descent was completely superior to the incomplete version of Hell's Descent bullet. This sword not only contained the power of the fire god, but also Ji Dong's most powerful attack. When Ji Dong endured the amplification effect of the absolute love poppy's quench thirst with poison, his deity annihilation strike also temporarily broke through to the 9th stage. This was also why he had previously told Dark Fate that even if Dark Fate did not use his ultimate sure kill skill, he was confident that he could still severely injure Dark Fate. The 9th level of the God-slaying strike had given Ji Dong a new skill. It was also the strongest skill of the god-slaying strike. The god-slaying needle could pierce through all obstacles, including the obstacles of gods. This was the true means of killing gods. The fire god descent strike contained the power of the god-slaying needle. Darkness Tianji's Hell's Descent bullet had not been completed. Even if he had completed it, the final result would not have changed. The moment the fire god descent strike hit the darkness divine barrier, the god-slaying needle had already pierced through the obstacles in front of it and Darkness Tianji's body. The terrifying power pierced through Darkness Tianji's god-level physique, allowing Chrysanthemum Pig to escape and avoid being killed by the fire god descent strike. The darkness melted like snow under the attack of the light, and Darkness Tianji's body was destroyed. However, just as Darkness Tianji's body was destroyed, Ji-Dong's fire divine sword lost all its radiance and turned into a pitch-black sword that descended from the sky towards the ground. Ji-Dong, who was standing in front of the Darkness divine disciples, felt his body go limp and he was about to collapse. The 3 yin-yang crown on his head turned into 2 instantly, and the golden light receded like the tide. After all, Ji-Dong wasn't a god. When he used the fire god's descent slash, the boost from the absolute love poppy had come to an end. If it wasn't for the help of the core of life, he wouldn't have been able to last this long. But even so, the core of life had already shattered. If not for the fact that his divine power was exhausted, how could Ji-Dong not be able to control the fire god sword and let it fall from the sky? At this moment, a green light descended from the sky and enveloped Ji-Dong's body, making him feel refreshed and straightened his back again. It was the holy level wood magic from Chrysanthemum Pig that assisted him. However, after this, his chrysanthemum body had already fallen unconscious on the back of the sacred evolution fire dragon. Even though it was a sacred beast, it was unable to withstand the aftermath of the life and death battle in the darkness of heaven's secrets and the final clash between light and darkness. After rescuing Ji-Dong at the last moment, it immediately fainted from its heavy injuries. "Ji-Dong, how are you?" Chen Sichuan took a step forward and arrived behind Ji-Dong. She hugged Ji-Dong's body and desperately poured the extreme Yiwood devil power in her body into Ji-Dong's body, replenishing his almost dried-up body. Although Ji-Dong's body was currently weak, his spirit was still extremely excited. His soul cultivation had already risen to the god level, and it had not weakened because of the dissipation of his mana. "Quick, we can't let He Tianji's divine sense escape. We must destroy him in both body and soul." As it spoke, the sacred evolution fire dragon had already received Ji-Dong's order and dived downwards. At the same time that darkness heaven's secrets was destroyed by the fire god's descending slash, his divine sense also quickly ran away, wrapped around Ji-Dong's falling fire god sword, and descended to the ground below. Once a person reached the god realm, they would condense their divine sense. Unlike ordinary people, their souls would not dissipate upon death. Although Darkness Tianji was unable to truly devour the chrysanthemum pig to become a god, just like how Ji-Dong had used the absolute love poppy to raise his soul to the level of divine sense, his soul power was still at the level of divine sense after his body was destroyed. He fled in panic. As long as his divine sense was not destroyed, he still had a chance to be reborn. The Fire God Sword was naturally coveting the power of the Fire God Sword. Darkness Tianji did not flee immediately, as he knew very well that with his injured divine sense, it would be impossible for him to fly past the sacred evolution fire dragon, which was at the saint level. Moreover, Ji-Dong's divine sense had been locked onto his divine sense. Instead of fleeing far away, he flew straight in the direction of the Dark Army. After all, Ji-Dong was a step slower because his mana had been exhausted. By the time the sacred evolution fire dragon had caught up, Darkness Tianji's divine sense had already rushed into the Dark Army. Then, Darkness Tianji's voice rang out. "Don't come over, or I'll kill him." The sacred evolution fire dragon's swooping body suddenly arrived in the midst of the Dark Army. A body slowly floated up under the influence of a black airflow, and Ji Dong's fire god sword was pressed against the neck of this person. That black stream of air was undoubtedly Darkness Tianji's divine sense that had just escaped, and the one who had been locked down and suppressed by his divine sense and blocked by the fire god's sword was Fury. Ji Dong stood on Maotai's head, with Chen Sichuan and Light Tianji behind him. His soul cultivation had already reached the level of divine sense, and with the help of Light Tianji and Chen Sichuan, he far surpassed the injured Darkness Tianji. If Darkness Tianji had not held Fury hostage, Ji Dong was confident that he could instantly destroy his fleshless and heavily injured divine sense with a divine sense attack. "Don't come over. If you dare to attack me, I'll kill him immediately and make you regret it for the rest of your life." Darkness Tianji's hysterical voice reverberated in the air. Because he did not have a physical body, it was extremely strange. There was no need to say anything when they saw this scene. The light and darkness sides already knew the outcome of the battle. Darkness Tianji, who had already become a god, was actually the loser. Cheers had already spread throughout the entire light camp, and all the light camp powerhouses were rushing over. Darkness Tianji, even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. How dare you hold your own son hostage? Light Tianji roared furiously. And Tianji laughed maniacally. Son? A son who betrayed his father? Do you guys really think that I don't know that Fury was sent here by you guys to hide by my side? That's right, he is my son. However, he no longer treats me as his father. At the start, I still believed in his return. However, as you Light Saint followers wreaked havoc in my Darkness continent, as well as the appearance of the formation used by the Devil Masters in your Light Army, I knew that this good son of mine had been hiding by my side. Otherwise, why would he tell me that the difference between your strength and your true abilities is so great? Also, he didn't inform me of something as important as the 5 elements formation. The reason why you guys can wreak havoc in the Darkness continent is probably because of this good son of mine. What's the use of having him? I didn't expose him before because he is my son. I wanted to wait until I became a god and destroy all of you. My son would then have no other choice. Only then would he truly recognize me as his father. But now it seems impossible. His life was given by me. He was the one who betrayed me first. So what if I put righteousness before family? Darkness Tianji was no fool. He had long noticed Fury's suspicions. Otherwise, why didn't he hand over the Dark Demon army to Fury when Li Yonghao wasn't around, but to the substitute instead? Ji Dong took a deep breath. He knew that it was useless to say anything more now. He spoke in a low voice, "What do you want?" Darkness Tianji spoke hatefully, "You guys should be very clear about what I want. Release your divine sense lock on me, and I will leave with this unfilial son. Don't try to use your divine sense to scan my location. You should understand that I can react immediately. When I'm sure that I'm safe, I will naturally release this unfilial son. Don't try to negotiate with me. I have nothing now. There's no room for negotiation." Ji Dong took a deep breath. Of course, he knew that letting Darkness Tianji go at this time was definitely nurturing a tiger that would invite calamity. Although he couldn't do anything in a short time, even if he occupied a new body, it would take at least a few decades or even hundreds of years to cultivate back to the strength of a god. But as long as he was alive, even if he was a huge threat to the 2 continents or even the entire world. But what could Ji Dong do now? It could be said that Fury, who had been lurking by Dark Tianji's side, had contributed greatly to their eventual victory in this holy war. Even Ji Dong being able to guess Dark Tianji's final plot was closely related to Fury constantly conveying Dark Tianji's situation to him. Moreover, Dark Tianji was his senior brother. How could he watch Fury be killed by Darkness Tianji? Little junior brother, don't agree to him. Fury's somewhat trembling voice sounded. Although Darkness Tianji had suppressed his body, he couldn't stop him from speaking. At this time, Fury's tiger eyes were already filled with tears. That's right, my father, I did betray you, but do you know? I didn't have a father since I was a child. When I was still very young, I was called a bastard. How lucky I was to be able to survive day by day. In order to prove myself, I desperately cultivated and put in several times more effort than others. When I was suffering, where were you? That day, you came to me and asked me to listen to your orders and tell you the news of the radiant world. But you ruined my mother's life, so you are also my enemy. Because of your appearance, my heart was incomparably conflicted, which made my character even more unyielding and unacceptable. As a result, my beloved woman also left me. If it wasn't for little junior brother's reminder, I'm afraid Yi Xin would never have forgiven me. However, not long after Yi Xin and I reunited, you launched the great calamity of the Holy Evil Island and triggered the myriad lightning calamity realm, destroying the last trace of warmth in my heart. After returning to the radiant continent, I thought a lot. I thought of the simple teachings of the mayors, I thought of Yi Xin, and I also thought of the living beings that were destroyed by you. Although I betrayed you, I couldn't betray my own beliefs. If this world was ruled by you, then no matter what race it was, people would be plunged into misery and suffering. So, I told little junior brother everything. I wanted to redeem myself, and at the same time, I hoped to redeem you. After all, you are the only person in this world that I am related to by blood. Even if there is only a trace of a chance, I am not willing to give up. At this point, Fury's face was already covered in tears. However, I soon discovered that I was wrong, because I can't change your mind at all. Your heart has already truly fallen into darkness. Little junior brother, don't worry about my life and death. I have long wanted to die. With a father like this, what is the point of me living? I betrayed my father. After all, I am his son. Since I can die in his hands, I no longer owe him anything. Instead of living in pain, it is better to die cleanly. Do it, little junior brother. If you don't do it and let him go, I will never come back alive. If there is a next life, I hope to be born as an ordinary person, with a kind father. As he spoke, Fury had already closed his eyes. His mood was full of determination. Son, you are really my good son. Yes. Even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. Darkness Tianji's voice suddenly changed. The previous madness and hysteria seemed to have completely disappeared at this moment. Suddenly, an incomparably surging dark aura suddenly broke out from Darkness Tianji's divine sense, and instantly wrapped around Fury's body. Ji Dong was taken aback. He, Guangming Tianji, and Chen Xishuan's combined divine sense no longer held back and blasted towards Darkness Tianji's divine sense. However, the next moment, he found that he was wrong. Because Darkness Tianji's divine sense did not destroy Fury, and the fire god's sword, which was controlled by his divine sense, had turned into a black lightning and arrived in front of him in an instant. Darkness Tianji used the last of his divine sense power to throw out the fire god's sword, and Hyoheim launched a fatal blow. Boom! Boom! Poof! 3 sounds rang out almost at the same time. Darkness Tianji's divine sense, under the combined divine sense attack of Ji Dong, Chen Xishuan, and Tianji, was instantly shattered. His evil life and soul finally came to an end, and both his body and soul were destroyed. Boom! Fury's body fell to the ground. In the end, Darkness Tianji did not kill him. No matter how evil a person was, there was still a trace of kinship deep in his heart. At the last moment, Darkness Tianji did not kill his son. It was the sound of a sword piercing through a human body. It was the sword of the fire god of swordsmen. The body that was pierced by the sword was not Dark Destiny's final target. It was not the tyrant Ji Dong who ruined all his plans. Chen Xishuan stood quietly in front of Ji Dong. Darkness Tianji's final attack was too fast. The fire god's sword appeared in front of Ji Dong in an instant. Even the sacred evolution fire dragon could not stop it in time. However, Chen Sichuan blocked it. The moment darkness Tianji's divine sense swept out, she was already there. The fire god's sword's sharpness pierced through her armor of eternity, her body, and her heart. But she still stood there, the corners of her mouth revealing a smile that was either bitter or sweet. "No!" Ji Dong cried out in pain. He grabbed Chen Sichuan's shoulder with both hands and jumped down to the ground. His divine sense was fully activated and integrated into Chen Sichuan's body. But the heart that was pierced by the fire god's sword could not be healed no matter what. He could clearly feel that Chen Sichuan's life was already fading away at an astonishing speed. "Ji Dong," Chen Sichuan called out to him with some difficulty. "Sichuan, I'm here." Although Ji Dong's magic had been exhausted, his body was still holding on. His entire body was trembling. When the fire god's sword pierced through Chen Sichuan's heart, he felt as if his heart had been pierced. Tears flowed out uncontrollably. He held Chen Sichuan's hand tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. "Ji Dong, don't cry. I don't like to see you sad," Chen Sichuan murmured. "I've loved you for 5 years and followed you for 5 years. Now it's the destined end. I only have 2 wishes. I want to die in your arms and hear you say that you love me." Yes, this was the last method that Chen Sichuan had thought of. It was also her last chance. She knew that as long as Ji Dong could say the 3 words, "I love you," to her, perhaps there was still a chance. Ji Dong carefully embraced Chen Sichuan's body and gently stroked her face. "Sichuan, why are you so silly? I'm not worth it. I'm not worth your love." Chen Sichuan shook her head gently. There was no trace of blood on her perfect face, but her gaze towards Ji Dong was still so gentle. "No, you are worth it." Ji Dong slowly raised his head and looked into the sky. His gaze was already infatuated. 5 years. 5 years have passed. Raging flames, I did not go back on my word. For the past 5 years, I have used a peerless wine to pay tribute to you every year. My love for you has never changed. In the past 5 years, my heart has always been tormented by pain. Now, everything has ended in the memorial hall. The responsibility on my shoulders has also been lifted. I can finally be free. Although I don't know where you are, my soul will definitely find you." He lowered his head and his gaze once again landed on Chen Sichuan's delicate face, which revealed a look of despair. He said gently, "I'm sorry, Sichuan. I can only fulfill half of your wish. You will die in my arms. However, the only thing I can give you is my body. My soul no longer belongs to me. When my lover left, it was already broken. I'm sorry, I know how good you are. However, my heart has already belonged to the flaming bar in this life. In my next life, for all eternity, it will only belong to her. I have no way to repay you for your feelings. I don't dare owe you such a debt of love. I have to find my flaming bar cleanly. I owe you too much. I will never be able to repay you. The only thing I can leave for you is my life." As he spoke, Ji Dong's right hand had already firmly and forcefully pressed against the hilt of the fire god's sword. The power of his divine sense completely exploded, and with a piu sound, the fire god's sword that had pierced through Chen Sichuan's heart also pierced through his heart. "Ji Dong, don't!" Radiant heavenly secrets shouted. All the radiant heavenly saints charged towards them at the same time. However, it was all too late. The fire god's sword had already pierced Ji Dong's heart. "Don't come over!" Ji Dong roared furiously, and a powerful divine sense suddenly burst forth, sweeping away all the people who tried to get close to him, leaving an empty space within a radius of 100 meters. He struggled and broke free from the fire god's sword. Fresh blood spurted out and sprayed on Chen Sichuan's body. Bottle after bottle of exceptional wine was kicked out of the vermilion bird bracelet. When the bottle caps were opened, a rich aroma of wine immediately spread. A crystal shaker appeared out of thin air. A strand of wine shot out from each bottle and entered the shaker. Then, the bottles of wine were scattered in all directions by Ji-dong. A strong flame ignited and formed a huge ring of fire that surrounded him and Qin Sichuan. Ji-dong smiled. He smiled very happily. It wasn't a smile of relief. His hand gripped the shaker tightly. His whole person seemed to have entered a state of madness. He gently shook the shaker. At this time, there was no rhythm. He murmured, flaming bar, I'm sorry. I can't wait for 10 years. 10 years is too long. I've found all the dimples you want. I can finally go and find you without any worries. Let me make you one last cocktail. Qin Sichuan stared blankly at Ji-dong. She was not dead yet. The wood magic of the 9 crowns cultivation base was still hanging on to her last breath of life. She never thought that the final result would be like this. Tears gushed out of her eyes. 5 years of repression, 5 years of suffering, all burst out at this moment. She didn't know where she got the strength from, but she suddenly threw herself forward, broke free from the fire god's sword, and rushed forward to hug Ji-dong's hand, which was shaking the jug. Fool, Ji-dong, you fool, you fool. Why won't you say those 3 words to me? You didn't betray the flaming bar, but you always rejected the flaming bar that was right beside you. I am your flaming bar. Seeing that the only man she had ever loved was about to die in agony, Qin Sichuan could no longer care about the bet she had with the god of evil. She had wanted to say this for far too long. Ji-dong was about to die, so what was the point of the bet? They could not be together after all. At this moment, she only wanted him to know that she had always been by his side. Ji-dong held the shaker sluggishly. He looked at Qin Sichuan, who had thrown herself into his arms. He fell into a daze and said with a trembling voice, What did you say?" Qin Sichuan's eyes were hazy with tears. The blood that flowed out of their chests had already mixed with each other. "Fool, I am your flaming bar. Ji-dong, do you still remember? The first glass of wine you made for me was called Flaming Bar's Burning Passion. When you first saw me, the first thing you saw was my hand. The first ability I taught you was the divine yin-yang lock and the yin-yang vortex, as well as the imprint of the 2 great kings. Fool, you fool, why don't you think about why Qin Sichuan fell in love with you at first sight, why she would follow you till death? Because Qin Sichuan is the flaming bar, and the flaming bar is Qin Sichuan." Hearing Qin Sichuan's words, Ji-dong was dumbfounded. He said with a trembling voice, That's impossible. My flaming bar is already dead. Why, you're lying to me. Otherwise, why didn't you tell me earlier?" The flaming bar said mournfully, "Because my resurrection as Qin Sichuan was a bet between me and the ruler of gods. I couldn't tell you who I was unless I could use Qin Sichuan's identity to make you say, 'I love you' to me. But you fool, you still refuse to tell me. Actually, I'm very happy that you're like this. But I'm also very sad that we can't be together. Ji-dong, Ji-dong." The flaming bar's final radiance, coupled with the emotional stimulation, caused the flaming bar to spill everything. However, her and Ji-dong's lives were rapidly slipping away. With a loud bang, the crystal flask in Ji-dong's hand fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. The rich aroma of alcohol gushed out, and the surrounding flames instantly ignited the liquid under their feet. The flames instantly climbed up their bodies and enveloped them completely. Flaming. "I love you. I love only the flaming bar and not Qin Sichuan. Flaming bar. I don't regret it. I love you. I love you. I love you." Ji-dong hugged the flaming bar's body tightly. His voice became incomparably high in the flames. Yes, he didn't regret it. He didn't regret it at all. If he had said the words "I love you" to Qin Sichuan, how could he face the flaming bar? He didn't regret it. Even though they walked towards death together in the end, he knew that the flaming bar wouldn't really blame him. Everything with Sue was over. To be able to hug the flaming bar and die together with her was much better than not knowing where she was going. The flaming bar slowly closed her eyes, raised her arms and hugged Ji-dong's neck. Little Ji-dong, I love you too. My greatest luck in this life is falling in love with you, you fool. The thick flames, mixed with the strong aroma of wine, rose up together with the lover who had gone through all kinds of hardships and finally hugged each other tightly. At the same time, the endless void was also lit up. A black and white light quietly descended from the sky, rising from the place where Ji-dong and the flaming bar were tightly hugging each other. The holy evil island was once again divided into two. Light and darkness were finally separated according to Ji-dong's wish. The divine realm, black and white, two beams of light facing each other. At this time, the divine realm was quiet, especially in the territory of the two supreme rulers of the divine realm. The silence was even more terrible. The white light flickered and the voice of the god of light slowly sounded. In his voice, there was a sense of loss. Evil, do you win this bet? The god of evil smiled bitterly. It seems that I was really wrong. 5 years, the temptation of beauty, the tempering of time, but that bastard didn't change at all. But I really don't understand what love is. How can it be so powerful that they are willing to sacrifice their lives for each other, without any complaints or regrets? A loss is a loss. I admit that I lost. But I don't understand the power of love. Tell me, what do you want me to agree to? The god of virtue smiled. Evil, do you still remember how long we have been the divine kings? The god of evil said, who remembers? It has been tens of millions of years. It's so annoying to stay here all the time. Those guys are so cunning. They all hide far away when we want them to take over the divine king's position. The Azura god is smart. He forcibly took half of the inheritors of the sea god and gave his inheritance to Tang San. Now that Tang San has taken over the Azura god's position, he is so relaxed. I don't know where he went to have fun. The god of goodness chuckled and said, so you're saying that you don't want to be the god king? The god of evil snorted. Are you willing? But how can our position of divine king be given away so easily? The god of virtue smiled. It's not impossible. I won the bet. What I want you to do is to give up the position of the evil god. The god of evil was shocked. Good, are you crazy? Give up the position of the evil god? Then who will take over my position as the divine king? The god of virtue said, what do you think of that kid Ji-dong? He suffered so much in the human world. He and the flaming bar have always been in our bet. The flaming bar can be forgiven. She is a non-human who has become a god. She must accept our test to be given the position. But that kid Ji-dong is an undeserved calamity. His soul itself has already reached the divine sense realm. Letting him inherit your evil god's godhood is a form of compensation for him. Of course, we can let him temporarily take over the position of the evil god. Based on our test and his character, I think he is qualified. To the god of virtue's surprise, the god of evil's voice was filled with surprise. That's right. Why didn't I think of it? Ji-dong has a strong will. Even in the divine realm, it's hard to find him. Let him temporarily take over my position as the divine king. I can also go to the human world. Only by experiencing it for myself can I find the secret of love. Who knows, there might be a lifelong marriage waiting for me. Let this divine king experience the taste of love for myself. The god of virtue grinned. He thought to himself, is the taste of love so easy to taste? Evil, so you've been here for a long time. Am I not? You're not the only one who wants to go down to the human world. Southern Fire Empire, Flame Haven. In Flame Haven, there was a famous bar. The reason it was famous was simple. The Holy King, the god of wine, Ji-dong, who saved the world of light, made his first drink here. The name of this bar was Flaming Bar, Burning Passion. Legend has it that the Holy King, Ji-dong, made the first drink for his beloved queen of the Flaming Bar in the core world. It was also called Flaming Bar, Burning Passion. Memories of the divine realm, completely playing with humans. It's been a few days, why hasn't it happened yet? Just as the black-robed youth was muttering to himself, the bar's door suddenly opened and a person walked in. The moment she walked into the flaming bar, she immediately became the focus of everyone's attention. It was a woman dressed in white. Her pure and innocent appearance made it impossible for anyone to have any evil thoughts. She wore a spotless white dress, and 2 strands of long black hair hung in front of her. Her jet-black eyes shone with a gentle light, and her transcendent aura was like a flawless white lotus. That's her. The black-robed youth was overjoyed when he saw the white-robed woman. He immediately felt that this woman was the one he was looking for. He couldn't help but think, this kindness is really not bad. He arranged such a beautiful woman for me. She's no less beautiful than the flaming bar. I'm really looking forward to it. As he thought of this, he walked towards the white-robed woman. There were already quite a few people in the bar. Most of them were still in a state of shock from the white-robed woman's beauty. The black-robed youth casually walked in front of the white-robed woman and blocked her way. He said in an extremely straightforward manner, "That's great. I've finally found you. Beauty, I think we're destined to be married for life. Let's fall in love passionately." As soon as he said this, the bar was instantly in an uproar. Many customers looked at the black-robed youth as if they were looking at an idiot. Even hitting on someone shouldn't be this direct, right? No one thought that he would succeed. To them, the white-robed woman was already giving him a lot of face by not slapping him. However, to everyone's surprise, the white-robed woman didn't look surprised at the black-robed youth at all. She didn't scold him for trying to hit on someone. Instead, she smiled gently and nodded lightly. The black-robed youth was overjoyed and shouted, "I've finally found my destined marriage." The white-robed woman gently pulled his hand and said, "Sir, let's go." "Where?" the black-robed youth asked doubtfully. "To the hotel." "Ah! Sir, didn't you say we're destined to be married for life? Just 50 gold coins and I'll end this marriage with you." Ah! Cries of agony could be heard 10 miles away. God realm. Ji-dong, don't you think this is too much? Flaming Bar, who was dressed in a gorgeous white dress, hugged Ji-dong's arm. Her pretty face was filled with a satisfied smile. She could finally be with her lover. Furthermore, the two of them had miraculously become god kings. Ji-dong, who was dressed in black, snorted coldly and smiled evilly. "Is it too much? Why don't I think so at all? You've forgotten how they played us. Don't they want to experience what love is? Then let them experience the joys and sorrows of love. Otherwise, we'll be letting them down for taking care of us so well." Raging Flame gently nodded her head. "The night party you spoke of, we can't let them off easily." Ji-dong chuckled and said, "Since we're already god kings, why don't we use our official position for personal gain and bring our friends up? That way we won't be lonely." Flaming Bar nodded and smiled. "Sure. I completely agree. Unfortunately, Si-dong wants to be the Dragon Emperor, so he can't come for now. But there shouldn't be any problems for the others." Ji-dong immediately began to think about how to bring his friends to the God Realm. Although this place was good, it would be too lonely if it was just them. At this time, Flaming Bar suddenly said, "Ji-dong, it's time." "Flaming Bar, do you really want it?" Flaming Bar said seriously, "Of course, you have to compensate me for the pain of waiting by your side for 5 years. 10,000 times a day isn't too much, right? A day in the God Realm is very long. Are you not willing?" "I'm willing, of course I'm willing. Then let's begin. Flaming Bar, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you." End of book.